May 13th, 2013. It's a day that people that live in this rural area will never forget, ever.
All right, what do you need to tell us? I don't want to say that I'm crazy, but I'm just, just hearing stuff. The voice will tell me to do this and do that.
So what kind of things were these voices saying?
To kill somebody.
They have a spree killer on their hands. Wherever he happens to be is where he might strike again. And we don't know where that is.
Nobody knows what's going on. Why is he doing this? Who is he targeting?
The garage door was open, then I walked in. I shot the lady first. And I shot the old man in the front of the head.
The body count is going to continue to rise. Where is this son of a...
And then I just went blank. Then I shot him.
Some crimes occur, make the evening news.
We now have the identity of all 5 victims.
And then don't survive the 24-hour news cycle. And there are some crimes that people are never able to forget. It's around 7 a.m., and Marcia Longfellow is worried. She's been trying to call her friend Ellisir Graham for quite some time and hasn't been able to reach him, and that, she thinks, is very unusual. So she goes to the gas station where he works, but he's not there. And then she notices fluttering newspapers in the wind, a short distance away from the station. She walks closer to investigate and sees something on the ground. What is that? What she finds is Ellisir Graham, half naked and dead, and so it begins.
I'm David A. Frankel. I'm a retired Washoe County Sheriff's Office detective in Reno, Nevada. When I got hired, after a couple years, I rotated into an undercover role where you follow the worst criminals around, and you really got an eye into how the criminals think, what they're doing. Criminals always throw curveballs, so you just got to keep an open mind and think out of the box. On that day, we got notified of a body out off of Interstate 80, and there's not much out there. I remember seeing like newspapers all over, and then the body was kind of in an area just off the road and seemed to be covered by a blanket.
The briefing deputies tell Frankel that the victim is 51 years old. His name is Ellisir Graham, and he works at that particular gas station a very short distance away.
The body was found at the I-80 Mustang exit. It's very familiar to people because the Mustang Ranch is at that exit.
The Mustang Ranch is a brothel about 15 miles outside of Reno. It has been there for a long time.
The Mustang Ranch, it's a popular place. You're wondering if it's related to that.
Prostitution encourages the arrival of an unsavory element in society. It waves a red flag. It says, come here and do as you wish. Come on down. You're the next contestant, and the customer is always right. The deputy coroner and Frankel together respond to look at the body.
His pants are pulled down and his shirt's pulled up. He appears to have some sort of injury.
The deputy coroner does a closer examination of the head, and he discovers 3 small caliber gunshot wounds. The general position and the indication of the body is he was killed recently, overnight, less than 12 hours. There's no evidence of a struggle, no defensive wounds. He has money in his wallet. So why is he undressed? Does the shooter want to humiliate him so when he's discovered he's naked? It could be anything.
Mr. Graham's body was found 100 yards or so from a gas station that he also worked at. We did talk to people at the gas station.
The employees say the last time they saw Eliezer was last night when they closed and they all left for the evening. And there's certainly nothing out of the ordinary in this gas station this morning. There's no robbery. They say he has a truck, so where is it? They don't know. It's always important to search the surrounding area from a crime scene to determine if other evidence can be discovered. And as those investigators fan out to search the area, Detective Frankel goes to speak with the relatives of the victim.
So I was at work, and then they told me that my brother was murdered. I just didn't believe it was real. Because I had just talked to him, I just got my Mother's Day gift. You know, how is it possible? But that's it. It was right in this stretch where he was killed. And he was found here, up there. When I came, there was still blood markings over there by the stop sign. This is my brother, Ellie. You can't see it in this picture, but Ellie had a crooked smile. You know? It looked like a Popeye grin. When I was growing up, there was 15 children. My dad was a pig farmer. And I think Dad and Ellie were like mud on a pig. They were inseparable. The two of them loved the hogs. He had multiple jobs. The gas station, the mission, the newspapers. He worked for the mattress company. I don't even know when he slept, but he kept it all up. He'd always help somebody. When somebody needed something, oh, go to Ellie. He can help you. Who do you rely on when your reliable rock is no longer here? When they told me that Ellie was murdered, I thought Frank killed him.
The sister believed that Mr. Graham's brother, Frank, may have killed her brother. They had an ongoing dispute that was pretty toxic.
Detective Frankel goes to see relatives for the very purpose of trying to develop a suspect. And this family handed him a suspect on a silver platter. At 7:30 a.m., the victim, Eliezer Graham, was discovered dead near the gas station where he worked. And now investigators are looking into his own brother as possibly the killer.
When they were kids, Frank and Ellie were very close. They were like two peas in a pod.
She said they will never talk about it, but something really bad happened between them, and neither one forgives the other.
Tension between Frank and Ellie grew. For 20 years, they had their rivalry.
In the prior few weeks, there had been an incident where Frank may have tried to run his brother over with a car.
She said Eliezer was visiting his parents at the family home, and the brother decided to come by as well. And when that happens, there's always going to be trouble. Frank allegedly announces he's going to kill his brother by running him over and attempts to do the same. When your blood runs hot, Whatever is convenient becomes a weapon.
I just remember Ellie just saying, you know, my leg's messed up. I'm like, are you okay? Yep. And then the police were called.
But Elazir wouldn't pursue anything, so the sheriff's department drops the charge.
Immediately you're thinking we might have a really good lead, so you definitely have to go check that out.
There's nothing more dangerous than a feud that goes on for 20 years, and then a recent event where it escalates. It gets more hateful by the minute. They find Frank, bring him into the office for interrogation. He is hostile. He is angry. He finds it to be ludicrous that they think he would kill his brother. And they say, well, why not? You tried to 2 weeks ago. Finally, he says, look, I just got into town. I've been driving a truck for weeks. He's an over-the-road trucker. They check with his employment, and that's true.
We were able to verify that Mr. Graham's brother, Frank, was not involved in his murder.
He's just a brother who doesn't like his dead brother. But that's all he is. So it's back to square one.
You just have to reassess any other information you can get and keep tracking down people with connections to the victim.
Now it's 9 o'clock in the morning, and Frankel hears back from the officers searching the crime scene area, where they discover a pickup truck in a ditch along I-80.
You certainly have to go look at it because it's in the vicinity of where the body's found and see if there's any connection.
They search the truck, assuming it belongs to Mr. Graham, and they don't find anything of any interest. So they run the plates, and they discover it belongs to someone else entirely.
It came back to people with the last name of Pape, and they lived in Fernley, Nevada, which was in the next county over. It's what we call a cow county, meaning it's a lot of farmland. It was a pretty peaceful little town.
Robert Pape is 84 years old, and he lives with his wife, Dorothy. And his truck is abandoned within a quarter mile of the murder scene. Now, why is that?
Did they see anything, or are they involved? You have to keep an open mind of it could be any of the above.
He may be 84 years old, but all it takes is 6 pounds of pressure to pull the trigger.
First thing we do is call the police department in that jurisdiction and ask them, hey, can you make contact with the Papes and ask them if they know anything about their vehicle being out here at the Mustang exit.
And the officer that answers the phone says, boy, that's amazing. We found his house on fire in Fernley this morning.
That was pretty alarming, like, what's going on?
A 911 call came in at 5:30 this morning. When the fire department responded, they discover a pickup truck in the garage was on fire. The fire had also spread to the house. The firemen went in to clear the house, but found no one home. Robert and Dorothy Pape are not in this house.
I felt that it wasn't this crazy coincidence. A light bulb went off. These might be linked together.
What is going on here? Something is.
So we responded out to Lyon County in the Fernley area where the other crime scene was to see if we could help with anything that they needed.
My name is Marty Dews. I was a detective for the Lyon County Sheriff's Office. When the Washoe County Sheriff's Office calls us, we're now looking at possibly sitting on a piece of evidence for their case. Everybody was kind of getting extremely confused. The pieces of the puzzle were fitting together oddly.
Things are going through your head, like, was Mr. Graham involved in something at the Pape's house? Did he steal their truck?
We know that the fire department responded to a truck on fire in the garage. They assume it is a truck belonging to the resident, Mr. Robert Pape. However, at 7:30 in the morning, Robert Pape's truck is 20 miles away So then the question becomes, if it's not the Pape truck, then whose truck is it?
When the police in Lyon County ran their records check, that truck came back to our victim, Mr. Graham. It's like, what the heck is going on here?
This just gets more confusing by the moment.
There must be some kind of connection. And also, where are the Papes?
Are they in the house? The fire department says no.
The fire department goes in, puts out the fire, and they make a sweep of the house. So we were basically taking it at their word. And it was myself and the fire marshal who were talking. And we're both kind of like, are we sure we checked the house good?
Fire departments are good at putting out fires. They're not very good at searching places. You train detectives to be thorough and detailed and overlook nothing.
So we did a greater walkthrough of the house.
With a structure fire, the entire house is covered in soot. It's understandable why people overlook things, because it's a mess. Filthy mess.
When we did go into the master bedroom, the bed had been stripped. There was a weird substance on the floor, just like squiggles on the carpet. It looked like shampooed. It was really weird. It kind of threw us off. When we got to the walk-in closet, something was just, it was just, they just call it JDL art. It just doesn't look right. Most of their clothes were hung up, but then there's these two huge piles of clothing on the ground, like somebody just emptied out a dresser and just threw it on the floor. Then we started just peeling back some of the clothes. And then all of a sudden it was just like, I think we got a problem.
You find what you've been looking for. 2 dead people. Detective Dave Frankel and Detective Dews of the Lyon County Sheriff's Department find 2 dead bodies, an elderly man and an elderly woman. They confirm the identity of these 2 people, and they are, in fact, Robert and Dorothy Pape.
We have 3 bodies. The Papes are dead. Mr. Graham is dead. What is going on?
In Lyon County, we're all deputy coroners in the sheriff's office. So we were like, okay, we need to start switching over to coroner mode and crime scene mode.
Mrs. Pape had been shot in the head, and Mr. Pape had been shot in the head and torso.
Small caliber bullets, just like Alisher Graham. Now we know this is connected, and the same shooter is involved in all of this mess. There is some evidence of decomposition, which says this didn't happen this morning, this happened a few days ago. So they are first. Mr. Graham is victim number 2. What is the purpose behind that? Detectives continue their search, and they find 2 locations, the obvious spots where these people were killed.
More than likely, Dorothy's laying in bed, and Robert Pape's laying flat on his back. On the floor.
So somebody moved those bodies post-mortem. Now, why did they do that?
The Pape's house appeared to be like a ransacked residence. Jewelry seemed to be gone. Other things that would lead them to believe this might have been a burglary gone bad.
To have this kind of violence associated with theft and burglary is very rare.
We did a greater walkthrough of the house. Now I start seeing indications that are throwing me off. There's a full cookie sheet of freshly cooked bacon. It's just sitting on the counter.
They find half-eaten food. You have a guy who kills and then decides to live there with his victims because they're decomposing 2 or 3 days worth. He's eating a pizza with dead people.
Extremely creepy. Extremely.
And while they're working this scene, the relatives of Dorothy and Robert Pape arrive, and they inform him of their death.
I go screaming up the driveway in my car, and I jump out, and this guy in a suit comes running up to me. I asked him, "You're a fire detective or something?" And he goes, "No, I'm a homicide detective." He puts his hands on my shoulder like this, and he's holding me, and he goes, "We believe that they've been murdered." And I'm like, "What? What do you mean they've been murdered?"
They asked who they might have known that would have done this.
They'd said a lot of people know the Papes, and nobody had a bad word to say about him.
Murder never, ever crossed my mind because everybody in that town loved him. This is Bob and Dottie's 50th wedding anniversary. They celebrated just the two of them because in their minds, that's all there was. You never saw one without the other. Bob and Dottie were married 63 years. Bob was in the U.S. Army, and he was in Korea for 2 years, and he had a Purple Heart. And then Bob's career was in the Drywall Tapers Union. Dottie was a stay-at-home mom. She had like 5 miscarriages trying to have children, and so Bob and Dottie pretty much gave up on ever having any children, and then she got pregnant with my husband. We were, the 4 of us, a very close family.
With the Papes being deceased in Lyon County and Mr. Graham being deceased in our county, and the coincidences of their vehicles being at opposite scenes, obviously we're thinking there's some kind of connection.
They asked, did your mother or your father know a man named Elizur Graham who worked in a gas station 20 miles away on I-80?
And I went, absolutely not.
So it certainly gives one the impression so far that these victims were connected at random.
It puts a lot of pressure on you because obviously your body count's going up quickly. Is somebody going on a killing spree? Do we have a serial murderer? Are we going to find more bodies?
Your assumption is great that this person isn't through killing. He likes it. And wherever he happens to be is where he might strike again. And we don't know where that is. Now it's 11 a.m. Both agencies have been placed on high alert. The Lyon County Sheriff's Department gets a phone call to check the welfare on Angie Duff. This is a neighbor of the Papes. Detective Dews can see that house from where he's standing.
They said the female that owned the house would volunteer at the senior center, and she was a no-call, no-show that morning. We sent 2 street deputies. Well, they get there and there's no answer. One of them went around back. And the back glass had been shattered, and there's glass everywhere.
He's looking through that window and sees the absolute worst thing he could see. The fear was he would strike again, and he has. It's a little after 11 a.m. on the same day, and they discover 2 more dead bodies, a man and a woman.
All of a sudden, that's 5. Our body count's going up.
There's no longer any doubt. This is one person. They're on a killing spree. Anyone they encounter, they're going to kill.
That's when the pressure ratchets up pretty high.
When they gain entry to the home of Angie Duff, they examine the house.
It's a chaotic crime scene. Actually, it was more like a combat zone. She was fighting for her life. There's blood everywhere. It's all over the carpets, it's on the floors, it's on the walls. I can honestly say it's the most bloody non-suicide I've ever seen.
The victims are identified as Angie Duff and her companion, Lester Lieber. Both have been shot to death with small caliber bullets.
Lester also had a very evident knife cut into his chest.
Now we have two weapons involved, perpetrated by the same person. Maybe we're now really enjoying the violence, hard to say. But it's an escalation.
So now what's the motive? Nothing is taken, nothing's rattled through, the cars are still here. And I have had a serious fight in this house with firearms and a bladed weapon. It's like it's calculated, but it's random at the same time.
So they're looking at these bodies, and then they realize the blood is very fresh. This just happened.
If they got far, they're on foot, right in the general area.
Where is this son of a... He's here somewhere.
So now we have to lock down that neighborhood and keep track of who's going in and out, because the killer might be right next to us and us not even know it.
We brought in the SWAT team, and then they searched as far as they could in every direction. We have other deputies doing house to house, knocking on doors.
It's quite a chaotic scene in a way, of a lot of moving parts.
This is absolutely every officer with a badge and a gun that they can get their hands on. We already have 5 people killed. We could have 20 dead before this is over. We gotta make it stop. And the way to make it stop is to find him.
In a small town, word gets around very quickly. So there was a lot of news media around. The people of Fernley are terrified.
You know your neighborhoods better than we do. Be our eyes and ears. Call us.
Nobody knows what's going on. People were wondering, is he going from house to house? Why is he doing this? Who is he targeting?
A lion that is on the hunt, and they are the prey. That's pressure. An hour passes. It is the longest hour in history for that neighborhood. The urgency is incredible. They feel it in their chest. Their heart's in hammer mode at the moment.
And all of a sudden received another call of a possible burglary.
They rush over a few houses down and they talk to the homeowner. He said, I hear somebody crawling around in a crawl space under my house. He is probably able to see them from under that house, and he has a gun. That's a very awkward feeling. You begin to feel very naked indeed.
The SWAT team was called so they could do the search.
So SWAT dives into that house, and they find nothing.
But they did locate a phone and a large amount of cash.
Maybe he was here, but he's not here now. So where did he go? When you know that your shooter is nearby, your head is on a swivel, your gun is in your hand, the safety is off, you're prepared to defend yourself. And you better be, because he's prepared to kill you. So they're looking around, and all of a sudden they hear somebody yell, there he is.
And all of a sudden he comes like through the garage, and he's got a pair of jean shorts on, he's covered in blood. The SWAT team comes around the corner, sees him, and then just swarmed in on him, puts him at gunpoint, orders him onto the ground, and got him in cuffs.
You assume he has a gun on his person. But they search him, and there's no gun.
He's holding both key fobs for both the cars at Angie Duff's house.
He identifies himself as Jeremiah Bean. Okay, Jeremiah, it's time to talk to this boy and find out what his maladjustment is.
So what kind of things were these voices saying?
To kill somebody.
It's euphoric when you finally find the animal and you lock him up. And he suddenly doesn't look like he's 12 feet tall. He just looks like what he is, an idiot.
Once you get this person in custody, it's almost a relief. And now it's piecing together how this all happened.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court. Do you understand?
Mm-hmm.
And are you willing to answer some questions at this time?
Yeah.
He says he wants to talk. Like, I want to tell my story.
All right, what do you need to tell us?
I don't want to say that I'm crazy, but I just wanted to plead criminally insane. I'm just hearing stuff. The voice will tell me to do this and do that.
Mr. Bean decides he's going to do an absolutely pathetic third-grade level impersonation of a schizophrenic. He's acting as if he's speaking to voices coming out of his own head. What he's getting is an F from his acting instructor because it's just pathetic.
So what kind of things were these voices saying?
I'm just saying to kill somebody.
To kill someone? Okay.
Yeah.
They see through his smokescreen in a microsecond.
Hey, Jeremiah, take your time on this, okay?
And eventually Jeremiah realizes that his shtick isn't working, and he starts to break down.
But, I just got tired of life, and, I just ended up, doing some foul stuff.
He just literally painted the story from the first time that he sought the papes and decided that he was going to rob them to the point where he was in the holding cell.
He says he was staying with a friend in the area of the Pape's home. He's a heroin addict. He's desperate for money.
He had been watching the Papes and kind of looked at them as an easy target. That's why he chose to victimize them.
The garage door was open, and I walked in, and then I just went into the bedroom. And then I shot the lady first in the back of the head. I think she was sleeping.
Her husband rushed to her aid and suffered the same fate.
He came back into the bedroom, and then I shot the old man in the front of the head.
Then he ransacked their home, took their property of value, and stayed there for a day or two.
Then what happened?
I took the trunk, and then I took off.
He went to Reno and pawned some things, got some money, went to a strip club.
He was using the Papes as his own personal ATM.
And then he came back to Fernley, right back to the Papes' house.
They were smelling pretty bad, so I just kind of covered them with clothes or whatever.
Okay. Were they in the same spots or what?
They were in the closet.
How did they get there?
Oh, I put them there.
And he said that he then took bottles of shampoo and squeezed them onto the carpet, hoping that would mask the scent.
And then Sunday came around, I was just like, I'm going to take the truck again and, I'm going to just try to have some fun or whatever. I left out to go to Reno.
He drives it onto I-80 and heads west.
Okay, so what happened?
So I was trying to make a U-turn off of the freeway, out in Sparks. The truck got stuck in a ditch.
He's within a quarter mile of the gas station where Graham works. Graham sees him off the road in this truck.
Okay, so how did you get him to stop?
I just waved. I was like, hey, excuse me. And then I just went blank. Then I shot him.
Was he still inside the car? Was he outside?
He was still inside the car. And I tried to scoot him over or whatever, but then he kind of like just fell out.
He grabbed his pants to try to move when they came down. He grabbed his shirt to drag him, and all it did was pull up. That's why he's almost naked. So now he jumps in Graham's truck.
But instead of getting back on I-80 heading westbound, for some reason, he went back to Fernley, right back to the Pape's house.
Then he realizes he's got another thing he has to cover up.
And then I set the truck on fire. I poured a gas can all over the truck. The matches were actually in the guy's truck. And then I ran.
He decided he was going to hide all of his crimes by starting a fire and then hopefully escape and disappear, which didn't go exactly as he planned.
I was just like, I don't know what to do. So I went a couple of houses up, and I just opened the door, and I went into the house.
The home of Angie Duff.
He said he wasn't there to rob the house. He was there to simply garner a vehicle.
And then what happened?
The lady came out of the bedroom, and she was just like, where are you? And then that's when I shot. And it missed.
Angie goes into fight or flight. But she picks fight, and so she begins to tussle with him a little bit. And he says that there's a struggle over the gun, and he gets her pushed back, and she kind of slumps, and then he drops the gun and he shoots her.
Then what happened?
Her husband came from the backyard.
Lester, who is in the backyard watching the Pape's house burn, comes back in the house. And Bean said that, basically he caught him off guard, firing at him, hitting him and missing him, blowing up the sliding glass door. They get into a small scuffle, but it wasn't much. He said Lester went down pretty fast. And then he grabbed a knife and started stabbing him.
Now he is covered in blood.
Then what happens?
I started to get undressed or whatever, and then I just left to hide.
And here come the police. Oh, no. Now he's trapped.
Thank you for telling me these things. It can't be easy.
You could see when he was done talking, his whole body just relaxed. He'd gotten it all off his chest.
After the confession is complete, they recovered a .22 caliber pistol, the ultimate corroborating evidence. He is toast, as we say in the murder biz.
The person of interest or suspect in 5 murder cases made his first court appearance just minutes ago.
So we're all waiting in the courtroom. He comes in with his attorney and stands up and pleads not guilty. It was really mind-boggling to everybody because he confessed right away that he did it. So he goes into trial.
The evidence going to trial is overwhelming. Jeremiah Bean is convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. They say the death penalty is revenge. They're right. It is. Time for you to say goodnight, Jeremiah.
Death is permanent, and he didn't care. He killed 5 innocent people that he didn't even know. People that had families, people that had kids and grandkids, and didn't think twice about it.
What I learned from this case is keep an open mind because anything can happen. And as much as I like to look at the good in people, there are wolves among us that will do terrible things.
The last time I was out here to tend to Ellie's cross was about 2.5, maybe 3 years ago. It just is a reminder that he's not forgotten.
The sickest part about the whole thing, if that slimy son of a had gone over to Bob and said, hey man, I need to make a couple of bucks, he would have hired him to help him pull weeds or do whatever. But what does he do? He kills them. Angry is what it makes me. How dare you? It makes me want to take a hammer to his head.
When people say there's good in everyone, this is the reason why that's not true. There's no good in Mr. Bean. What mercy do we owe him? None.
The night began with a silence, so complete it felt staged, as if the world itself were holding its breath, and in that stillness a single scream tore through the darkness, brief, fractured, then swallowed by the cold coastal wind, leaving behind nothing but an echo that would haunt a community for more than 2 decades. In the early hours of October 17th, 1998, a quiet residential street in Northern California became the starting point of one of the most chilling mysteries the state had ever known, a case that would slip into the shadows, labeled cold, forgotten by many, but never truly buried, because some stories refuse to stay dead. The house stood alone at the end of the block, a pale rectangle under the faint glow of a flickering street lamp, its windows dark, its porch light still burning as if waiting for someone who would never return. Inside lived 26-year-old Laura Bennett, a graphic designer with a reputation for kindness, a routine so predictable that neighbors could set their watches by the sound of her car pulling into the driveway each evening. She had been last seen alive at 9:42 p.m., caught on a grainy convenience store camera buying a bottle of water and a pack of gum, smiling briefly at the cashier, unaware that she was walking straight into the final hour of her life. When police arrived just after dawn, summoned by a coworker who had grown uneasy after Laura failed to show up for work, they found the front door slightly ajar, the lock intact, no signs of forced entry. Inside, the air was heavy, metallic, and still. The living room bore the first signs of violence: an overturned chair, a shattered picture frame, a thin smear of blood trailing across the hardwood floor like a grim breadcrumb path leading deeper into the house. In the bedroom, they found her. Laura lay motionless beside the bed, her body twisted at an unnatural angle, her eyes half open, fixed in a stare that seemed to accuse the empty room. The official cause of death would later be listed as blunt force trauma to the head, but the brutality of the scene spoke of something more chaotic, more personal, more desperate. The house was sealed, the street cordoned off, and within hours the neighborhood was transformed into a theater of shock and disbelief. Neighbors clustered behind police tape, whispering, speculating, scanning one another's faces for clues that did not exist. News vans lined the curb, satellite dishes pointed skyward, reporters rehearsing lines about a quiet community shattered by violence, while detectives moved through the house in careful, measured steps, cataloging every fragment of evidence, every misplaced object, every invisible trace that might lead them to the person who had walked in and out of this home without leaving a name behind. There were fingerprints, partial and smeared, none matching any record. There were fibers caught on the bedspread, indistinct, common, useless. There were shoe impressions in the soft soil beneath the bedroom window, distorted by the morning dew. Most importantly, there was biological evidence: skin cells beneath Laura's fingernails, a few droplets of blood not belonging to her, and a strand of hair clutched in her right hand, as if in her final moments she had managed to tear a piece of her attacker away. In 1998, DNA analysis was powerful but slow, constrained by databases that were still in their infancy. Samples were collected, labeled, stored, and tested, but when the results came back, they led nowhere. No match, no suspect, no explanation. Investigators began with the obvious. Friends were questioned, co-workers interviewed, neighbors canvassed. Laura had no known enemies, no volatile relationships, no recent threats. She lived alone, had recently ended a casual relationship months earlier, and spent most of her free time with a small circle of close friends. There was no sign of robbery, Her wallet lay untouched on the kitchen counter, cash still inside. Her car was parked neatly in the driveway. Nothing suggested a random burglary gone wrong, and nothing pointed clearly to someone she knew. It was as if the killer had stepped out of thin air, committed a singular act of violence, and then vanished back into nothing. As days turned into weeks, the case file thickened with reports that led to dead ends. A man seen walking his dog late that night remembered a dark sedan idling at the corner, but could recall no plate, no face, no sound. A neighbor thought she heard raised voices shortly before midnight, but could not distinguish words, only the cadence of tension. Another claimed to see a figure moving through Laura's backyard, yet the memory shifted with each retelling, details blurring until it became impossible to separate truth from suggestion. Every lead dissolved under scrutiny. Every promising thread unraveled. The community changed in subtle, irreversible ways. Porch lights burned through the night. Doors that once stood open were now bolted shut. Parents escorted children to school, scanning every passing car, every unfamiliar face. Fear seeped into the cracks of everyday life, quiet but persistent, a low hum beneath the surface of normalcy. And through it all, the name Laura Bennett echoed in local headlines, attached to phrases like brutal killing, no suspects, and finally, cold case, a term that felt less like a description and more like a verdict. For detectives, the frustration was suffocating. They revisited the scene, re-examined the evidence, replayed the timeline again and again, hoping to find the one detail they had missed. They reconstructed Laura's final day, her morning jog along the beach, her afternoon meeting with a client, the late dinner she ate alone, the television program she had been watching when she was interrupted. Nothing stood out. Nothing explained why she had opened the door that night, or how her killer had convinced her to let them in. The front door showed no signs of forced entry, suggesting trust, familiarity, or deception. As months passed, the investigation slowed, not for lack of effort, but because momentum is a fragile thing. New cases demanded attention, new emergencies pulled resources away, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, Laura's file was pushed to the back of the cabinet. It was not forgotten, but it was no longer urgent. The DNA samples were archived, the evidence sealed. The house sold to a new family who would never quite escape the weight of what had happened within those walls. And the case entered a long, uneasy sleep. Years slipped by. Technology advanced. Databases grew. Methods evolved. But for Laura's family, time did not heal. It calcified the pain, hardening it into something permanent. Her parents moved through life carrying a grief that never softened, each holiday an echo of absence, each birthday a reminder of a future erased. Her younger brother dedicated himself to keeping her name alive, organizing vigils, pushing for renewed attention, refusing to let her story fade into a statistic. Still, the silence from law enforcement remained unbroken, a void filled only by unanswered questions. Then, in the spring of 2020, something shifted. A routine audit of cold cases at the state crime lab brought Laura's evidence back into the light. Advances in forensic technology, particularly in the field of genetic genealogy, had begun to breathe new life into investigations long thought unsolvable. Using public genealogy databases, analysts could now trace familial connections through distant relatives, constructing family trees that narrowed the search for unknown suspects. It was a method that had already cracked several infamous cases, and now, for the first time, Laura's DNA samples were slated for reanalysis. The process was painstaking. The biological material was fragile, degraded by time, requiring delicate handling and meticulous sequencing. Technicians worked in sterile rooms, amplifying genetic fragments, assembling profiles piece by piece, feeding data into algorithms that searched for distant matches across sprawling databases of voluntary submissions. Days stretched into weeks. Then, finally, a hit appeared. Not a direct match, but a partial one. A third cousin, then a second cousin, names that meant nothing at first, scattered across different states, connected only by threads of shared ancestry. From those fragments, investigators began to build a map of bloodlines, tracing marriages, births, and migrations, following the quiet currents of family history until a single branch emerged, leading back to California, back to a man who, in 1998, had lived less than 5 miles from Laura Bennett's home. His name was Daniel Reeves. In 1998, Reeves was 32 years old, employed as a freelance contractor, drifting between short-term jobs, renting rooms, leaving little trace behind. He had no criminal record, no known connection to Laura, no obvious reason to appear on anyone's radar. In the years since, he had moved frequently, crossing state lines, changing addresses, blending into the anonymous churn of everyday life. To the world, he was invisible. To investigators, he was suddenly the center of everything. Surveillance began quietly. Old records were pulled. Associates were interviewed. A picture slowly emerged of a man who kept to himself, who avoided deep relationships, who left behind a trail of minor disputes and unresolved conflicts, never violent, never enough to trigger alarm, but just enough to suggest a pattern of instability. Still, suspicion is not proof, and in the absence of direct evidence, the case remained balanced on a razor's edge. In late summer, detectives followed Reeves to a roadside diner in rural Nevada. When he finished his meal, he tossed his napkin into the trash, unaware that a plainclothes officer retrieved it moments later, sealing it inside an evidence bag. The DNA extracted from that crumpled scrap of paper was rushed to the lab, and when the results came back, the match was undeniable. The genetic profile aligned perfectly with the unknown DNA recovered from Laura Bennett's fingernails 22 years earlier. The breakthrough was seismic. For the investigators who had carried the weight of this case, some for their entire careers, the confirmation felt unreal, a jolt of vindication and sorrow colliding in the same instant. For Laura's family, the phone call arrived like a thunderclap, reopening wounds even as it offered the first hint of resolution. For a community that had learned to live with uncertainty, the news sent shockwaves through conversations, social media, and memory, reviving a story that had never truly ended. But as the gears of justice began to turn, a deeper unease settled in. Because identification was only the beginning. Motive remained elusive. Opportunity, while plausible, was unproven. And the question that had haunted the case from the first moment still lingered in the air, heavy and unresolved. Why her? Why that night? And what, exactly, had happened behind that half-open door in the final minutes before the silence broke? The arrest would come later. The charges would be filed. The headlines would scream of a cold case solved, of a DNA breakthrough that stunned investigators. But beneath those words lay a truth far more complex, a story of chance, obsession, and a single, irreversible act that had rippled across decades, leaving scars that no verdict could erase. And as the past clawed its way back into the present, the shadows that had gathered around Laura Bennett's death began to stir, preparing to reveal a darkness that had waited patiently for 22 long years. The arrest unfolded without spectacle, a quiet convergence of law enforcement vehicles on a sun-bleached street where nothing about the scene hinted at the storm about to break, and when Daniel Reeves stepped out of his rented bungalow, blinking against the harsh Nevada sunlight, he had no idea that the past had finally caught up with him, that every mile he had driven, every address he had abandoned, every name he had almost become had led him back to one night in 1998 that refused to be forgotten. The cuffs clicked shut with a soft, metallic finality, and in that small, almost gentle sound, 2 decades of silence collapsed into a single irreversible moment. At the station, the air felt dense, saturated with the gravity of what was about to unfold. Detectives who had spent years chasing ghosts now sat across from a man whose DNA had bridged time itself, drawing a straight, unbroken line from a suburban bedroom in California to a diner trash bin in rural Nevada. Reeves appeared calm, almost detached, his eyes scanning the room with an unsettling neutrality, his posture relaxed in a way that felt practiced, as though he had rehearsed this moment countless times in the private theater of his own mind. When informed of the evidence, he did not protest, did not demand a lawyer, did not erupt in denial. Instead, he exhaled slowly, as if releasing a breath he had been holding for 22 years. The interrogation room became a crucible where fragments of memory, deception, and long-suppressed truth began to surface. Investigators laid out the timeline, piece by piece, reconstructing the final hours of Laura Bennett's life with forensic precision. Reeves listened in silence, his gaze fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor, the fluorescent lights casting sharp shadows across his face. When the photographs were placed before him, the overturned chair, the blood-streaked floor, the stillness of Laura's body, his jaw tightened, a subtle flicker of something dark passing through his eyes before vanishing again. He spoke slowly at first, words emerging as if dragged from deep underwater. He claimed he had known Laura only briefly, that they had met months earlier through a mutual acquaintance, exchanged a handful of casual conversations, nothing more. He admitted to being in the area that night, passing through on his way north, but insisted he had not seen her, had not entered her home, had not committed any act of violence. The story was thin, fragile, easily pierced by the relentless pressure of evidence. DNA does not forget. It does not misremember. It does not lie. And as the hours stretched on, the walls of Reeves's narrative began to crumble. He shifted, his voice faltering, his composure eroding under the relentless weight of proof. He spoke of obsession, of a fixation that had grown quietly, insidiously, fed by fleeting encounters and imagined connections. Laura, he said, had been kind, had listened, had treated him with a warmth he mistook for intimacy. In his mind, her politeness became promise, her smiles transformed into invitations, her boundaries erased by the force of his own longing. When she pulled away, when she failed to return calls, when she resumed her life without him, something inside him fractured, splintering into resentment and need. The night of October 17, 1998, emerged in broken fragments. He arrived unannounced, driven by a restless compulsion he could neither name nor control. Laura opened the door, surprise flickering across her face, but courtesy keeping it ajar. Words were exchanged, tense, hurried, escalating into argument. She tried to close the door.
He forced his way inside.
What followed unraveled in a blur of motion and sound, a violent convergence of fear and fury, ending in a single, devastating blow. When it was over, he fled, leaving behind blood, chaos, and a silence that would echo across decades. The confession, partial and jagged, offered answers while spawning new questions. Why had he kept silent for so long? How had he evaded detection? What other shadows lingered in the wake of his transient life? Each admission opened new corridors of inquiry, each revelation hinting at deeper, darker layers beneath the surface of an otherwise unremarkable existence. And as the details accumulated, the enormity of what had been lost and what had been stolen became impossible to ignore. In California, the news detonated across the community with the force of a long-delayed explosion. Headlines blazed. News anchors spoke Laura's name with solemn gravity. Social media ignited with disbelief, relief, and grief, emotions colliding in a chaotic surge. For those who had lived through the original investigation, the revelation felt surreal, as if a chapter thought permanently sealed had been ripped open, its contents spilling into the present. Old memories resurfaced, raw and unfiltered, carrying with them the same unease that had once haunted quiet streets and sleepless nights. Laura's parents received the call in the late afternoon, the sun already dipping low, casting elongated shadows across their living room. The words reached them like a distant echo, muffled by shock, the significance taking time to register. When it did, the dam broke. Tears flowed, not in a rush of relief, but in heavy, convulsive waves of sorrow, anger, and a grief that had never truly receded. Justice, when it arrives after so long, is a complicated thing, tangled with memories of absence and years spent waiting for an answer that might never come. Her brother drove through the night, the road unfolding beneath his headlights like a tunnel through time. He thought of childhood laughter, of late-night conversations, of the future she had planned but never lived. He thought of the man now in custody, of the invisible thread that had bound their lives together in a moment of irreversible violence. And he wondered whether any resolution could ever be enough to mend what had been shattered. As legal proceedings began, prosecutors assembled a case anchored in forensic certainty. The DNA evidence was irrefutable, a molecular fingerprint tying Reeves directly to the scene. His own admissions, though incomplete, corroborated the narrative of intrusion and violence. Witness statements, long dormant, were re-examined, their fragments aligning with new clarity. The dark sedan at the corner, the raised voices, the fleeting silhouette in the backyard. Each detail, once dismissed as unreliable, now slotted into place, forming a mosaic of that final night. Defense attorneys countered with familiar strategies, questioning the reliability of genetic genealogy, probing the possibility of contamination, challenging the context of the confession. But the scientific rigor of the evidence, combined with the consistency of the narrative, left little room for doubt. In court, the weight of 22 years pressed down upon every word, every motion, every breath. Spectators watched in hushed silence as the story unfolded, a slow, inexorable march toward accountability. Yet beneath the formal cadence of legal procedure, a deeper, more unsettling truth lingered. Reeves had lived freely for more than 2 decades, building a life in the margins, untethered to the crime that had defined him. He had walked among strangers, shared meals, held conversations, and slept peacefully, all while carrying the knowledge of what he had done. The thought unsettled even the most seasoned investigators, forcing them to confront the uncomfortable reality that some killers do not fit the archetypes, do not broadcast their darkness, do not leave obvious scars for the world to read. This realization cast a long shadow over the case, prompting renewed scrutiny of cold files across the state. If Reeves could remain undetected for so long, how many others had done the same? How many families still waited, their loved ones suspended in uncertainty, their stories stalled at the threshold of resolution? The breakthrough reignited a broader reckoning, a push to revisit dormant cases, to apply new technologies, to refuse surrender in the face of time. For the detectives who had labored on Laura's case, the outcome was both triumph and torment. There was satisfaction in seeing the truth emerge, in knowing their persistence had finally borne fruit. But there was also regret, a lingering ache for the years lost, for the justice delayed, for the knowledge that nothing they did now could restore what had been taken. In quiet moments, they replayed the early days of the investigation, searching for the signs they might have missed, the paths they might have taken differently, haunted by the possibility that closure could have come sooner. As the trial date approached, media attention intensified, transforming the courtroom into a focal point of national interest. Cameras clustered outside, their lenses trained on every arrival and departure, while commentators dissected each development with forensic enthusiasm. The phrase "cold case solved" became a mantra, repeated until it lost its meaning, stripped of the human cost that lay beneath its clinical simplicity. But for those at the center of the story, the experience remained deeply personal, a raw confrontation with violence, loss, and the long shadow of unanswered questions. Inside the courtroom, Laura's photograph sat beside the prosecution table, a silent witness to the proceedings. Her eyes, bright and alive, seemed to follow the motion of the room, a poignant reminder of the life interrupted. Her family occupied the front row, their presence both a testament to resilience and a visible manifestation of grief. Each day, they endured the retelling of her final moments, the dissection of her death, the transformation of her existence into exhibits and testimony. It was a necessary cruelty, a ritual of pain required by the machinery of justice. Reeves maintained his composure, his expression unreadable as witnesses recounted the evidence. When confronted with his own words, recorded during interrogation, he listened impassively, offering no visible reaction. Yet in fleeting glances, in the tightening of his fists, in the subtle shifts of his posture, there were hints of an internal struggle, a battle between denial and inevitability. Whether remorse stirred within him remained an unanswered question, locked behind a facade of stoic restraint. The jury absorbed every detail, every chart, every genetic comparison, every expert explanation of how microscopic traces could survive the erosion of time. They learned how DNA, once limited by technology, had become a bridge across decades, connecting past and present with unyielding precision. They learned how a single strand of hair, clutched in desperation, could speak louder than any witness, its silent testimony outlasting memory itself. And as the narrative coalesced, the conclusion seemed inescapable, a gravitational pull toward a verdict that would forever alter the trajectory of multiple lives. Yet even as the legal process advanced, a lingering sense of unease permeated the story. For all its resolution, the case underscored a haunting truth, that justice, no matter how precise, cannot undo the past. It can only illuminate it, casting light into darkness, without dispelling the shadows entirely. Laura Bennett would not walk again along the beach, would not return to her studio, would not celebrate birthdays or milestones. Her absence would remain a permanent fixture in the lives she touched, a void that no sentence could fill. And in that tension, between closure and loss, between accountability and irreversibility, the true weight of the case revealed itself. The DNA breakthrough had stunned investigators, had cracked a mystery once thought impenetrable. But it had also reopened wounds, revived memories, and forced a reckoning with the fragile boundaries that separate ordinary life from irreversible tragedy. As the trial loomed and the final chapter edged closer, the story pressed forward, carrying with it the echo of that first scream in the night, a sound that, after 22 years, still refused to fade. The courtroom felt sealed off from the outside world, a controlled environment where time itself seemed to slow, each second stretched thin by anticipation, and yet beyond its heavy doors, life continued as usual, indifferent to the gravity unfolding inside, a cruel reminder that even the most devastating stories occupy only a narrow slice of the world's attention. Inside, however, every breath carried weight, every footstep echoed with consequence, and as the trial entered its most critical phase, the tension tightened like a wire pulled to its breaking point. The prosecution opened with a narrative constructed not from speculation, but from an accumulation of facts so precise they bordered on surgical. They began with Laura Bennett's final day, recreating her movements in painstaking detail, grounding the abstract horror of her death in the tangible rhythms of ordinary life. Witnesses described her routine, her habits, the way she parked her car, the small rituals that had defined her evenings. The jury was guided, step by step, through the geography of her neighborhood, the layout of her home, the precise path taken by someone who entered uninvited and left behind devastation. The effect was immersive, almost suffocating, as if the room itself were being slowly transformed into a replica of that night. Forensic experts followed, their testimony delivered in clinical tones that contrasted starkly with the emotional charge of the case. Charts illuminated the screens, lines of genetic code translated into visual certainty. They explained how DNA had been extracted from under Laura's fingernails, how the fragile fragments had been preserved across decades, how advanced sequencing and genealogical mapping had narrowed the field from millions to one. They spoke of probability and certainty, of error margins so infinitesimal they bordered on the theoretical, of matches so exact they erased reasonable doubt. Each explanation tightened the net, drawing the narrative closer to an unavoidable conclusion. The defense countered with questions designed to destabilize that certainty. They challenged the chain of custody, probing for any gap, any procedural misstep that could cast doubt on the integrity of the evidence. They scrutinized the methodology, suggesting that reliance on public genealogy databases raised ethical and legal concerns, that the science, though impressive, was still evolving, still vulnerable to misinterpretation. Expert witnesses debated in dense, technical exchanges, their words cascading in waves of statistical jargon, leaving the jury to navigate a labyrinth of probabilities and protocols. Yet beneath the complexity, the core truth remained stubbornly intact, resistant to erosion. As testimony unfolded, the story of Daniel Reeves began to expand beyond the confines of a single crime. Investigators traced his movements before and after 1998, mapping a life characterized by transience and isolation. Former landlords described a quiet tenant who paid in cash, kept irregular hours, and rarely spoke. Coworkers recalled a man confident but distant, prone to sudden departures, leaving jobs without explanation. Former acquaintances spoke of brief, intense connections that flared and vanished, leaving behind confusion and unease. Together, these fragments formed a portrait of a man perpetually in motion, skirting the edges of belonging, never staying long enough to leave a lasting imprint. This itinerant existence, the prosecution argued, had shielded Reeves from scrutiny, allowing him to slip through the cracks of a system built to track patterns, not anomalies. Without a fixed address, without stable relationships, he became a ghost in the administrative machinery of modern life, his movements too erratic to trigger suspicion, his past unexamined. The defense, in turn, framed this same pattern as evidence of harmless eccentricity, a lifestyle choice born of restlessness rather than malice. They cautioned against conflating social detachment with criminal propensity, urging the jury to separate discomfort from proof. Then came the recordings. The courtroom fell into a near-total stillness as excerpts from Reeves's interrogation were played. His voice emerged through hidden speakers, flat, measured, punctuated by long pauses. The initial denials, the gradual erosion of certainty, the hesitant admissions, all unfolded in real time, an auditory journey into a psyche under siege. When he spoke of obsession, of misread signals, and imagined intimacy, a ripple of unease moved through the room. When he described forcing his way inside, a collective intake of breath betrayed the audience's horror. And when he recounted the moment of violence, his words trailing off into silence, the absence of detail became more disturbing than any explicit confession. Laura's family listened, rigid and unmoving, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the present. For them, these recordings were not evidence, but echoes of a nightmare that had already stolen too much. Each word reopened old wounds, each pause a reminder of what could never be undone. Yet they endured, anchored by the hope that this painful exposure would finally bring accountability, that the truth, however brutal, was preferable to the endless uncertainty that had preceded it. Outside the courthouse, the story took on a life of its own. Media outlets dissected every development, speculating on motives, analyzing behavioral patterns, debating the ethics of genetic surveillance. Public opinion oscillated between fascination and fear, captivated by the power of science to resurrect the past, unsettled by the implication that no secret, no matter how deeply buried, was ever truly safe. For some, the case became a symbol of progress, proof that persistence and innovation could conquer even the most entrenched mysteries. For others, it was a cautionary tale, a reminder that the line between privacy and security was growing increasingly blurred. As the trial progressed, the defense shifted strategy, focusing less on denial and more on mitigation. They portrayed Reeves as a man plagued by loneliness and emotional instability, arguing that the crime, though indefensible, had been the product of a psychological collapse rather than calculated malice. Mental health experts testified about fixation disorders, about the fragile boundary between fantasy and delusion, about how rejection could trigger catastrophic responses in vulnerable individuals. The aim was not to absolve, but to contextualize, to paint the act as an aberration rather than a reflection of inherent evil. The prosecution responded with a starkly different framing. They emphasized choice, highlighting the sequence of decisions that led Reeves to Laura's door, the deliberate steps he took to enter, the force he applied, the calculated flight that followed. They underscored the years of silence, the absence of remorse, the ordinary life he resumed while a family grieved. In this narrative, the crime was not an accident of circumstance, but the culmination of entitlement and rage, a violent assertion of control that demanded full accountability. Day by day, the courtroom became a battleground of narratives, each side vying to shape the jury's perception of truth. Evidence was weighed, credibility assessed, emotions restrained. And yet, Beneath the procedural choreography, a deeper, more primal struggle unfolded. The human need to assign meaning to senseless violence, to locate order within chaos, to believe that understanding could somehow lessen the blow of tragedy. As closing arguments approached, the atmosphere thickened. Every gesture, every inflection took on amplified significance. The jury, now custodians of a story spanning decades, prepared to withdraw into deliberation, carrying with them the accumulated weight of testimony, science, and sorrow. Their decision would not restore Laura's life, would not erase the years of waiting, but it would draw a line beneath the narrative, marking an end to uncertainty and the beginning of whatever came next. Yet even as resolution loomed, the case refused to settle neatly into closure. Unanswered questions lingered at the edges, shadows that no verdict could dispel. What internal landscapes had fueled Reeves's obsession? How many near misses, how many unreported encounters had preceded that fatal night? Were there others, unrecognized, who had brushed against the same darkness and walked away, unaware of the danger they had escaped? These uncertainties hovered in the background, a reminder that even the most exhaustive investigations illuminate only fragments of the truth. When the jury finally retired, the courthouse exhaled, tension diffusing into an uneasy calm. Hours passed, then more. Outside, dusk deepened into night, the glow of streetlights pooling across the pavement much as it had on that distant October evening. Reporters waited, cameras poised, voices hushed. Inside, 12 individuals grappled with the gravity of their task, parsing evidence, debating intent, confronting the stark reality of a life extinguished and another irrevocably altered. The verdict, when it came, would reverberate far beyond the walls of that room, echoing through the memories of a community and the broader narrative of justice delayed and reclaimed. But in the moments before its announcement, suspended between past and future, the story hovered in a fragile equilibrium, balanced on the edge of finality, its outcome poised to redefine not only a single case, but the enduring legacy of a night that had refused, for so long, to release its hold. The verdict arrived in the late hours of the second evening, when exhaustion had softened the edges of tension and the courthouse lights burned with a sterile, unwavering glare, and as the jury filed back into the room, their faces pale and drawn, the silence deepened into something almost physical, pressing against every chest, every throat, every unsteady breath. 12 strangers, bound by duty and circumstance, carried in their hands the power to close a chapter that had remained open for more than 2 decades, and with that power came a weight none of them would ever truly shed. When the foreperson stood, the rustle of movement cut through the stillness like a blade. The words were delivered in a voice that trembled just enough to reveal the gravity of the moment. Guilty. No hesitation. No embellishment. Just a single, devastating declaration that rippled across the room in a silent shockwave. Laura Bennett's mother covered her mouth, a sob escaping despite her efforts to remain composed. Her father bowed his head, eyes squeezed shut, as if bracing against a sudden physical blow. Her brother stared forward, unblinking, absorbing the finality of it all. Across the aisle, Daniel Reeves remained motionless, his expression locked in a mask of resignation, the lines of his face etched deeper by the knowledge that the long pursuit of truth had ended and the reckoning had begun. The judge's gavel struck with ceremonial gravity, sealing the verdict into the official record, yet even as the legal machinery moved forward, the emotional machinery stalled, struggling to process a reality so long deferred. Justice, delivered after 22 years, felt both monumental and strangely incomplete, as though something essential had been lost in the vast gulf of time. Outside, reporters surged forward, microphones and cameras thrust into the cold night air, hungry for reaction, for sound bites that could distill decades of pain into a few potent seconds. But inside, the weight of the moment resisted compression, expanding instead into a sprawling landscape of memory and grief. Sentencing would come weeks later, but in the immediate aftermath, the story pivoted inward, away from the spectacle of trial and toward the quieter, more enduring consequences of resolution. For Laura's family, the verdict reopened wounds even as it offered a measure of solace. The certainty of Reeves's guilt provided answers, but it also forced them to confront, in excruciating detail, the final moments of her life, moments they had been spared imagining for years. Now, those images were unavoidable, etched into public record, replayed across screens and headlines, woven into a narrative that no longer belonged solely to them. In the days that followed, they returned to their routines, tentative and fragile, as if stepping onto unfamiliar terrain. Ordinary tasks, grocery shopping, commuting, answering emails, took on an unreal quality, disconnected from the seismic shift that had just occurred. Friends and acquaintances offered condolences, congratulations, words of support that hovered awkwardly between celebration and mourning. Each interaction underscored the complexity of their experience, relief entangled with sorrow, closure shadowed by the permanence of loss. For the detectives who had shepherded the case to its conclusion, the aftermath brought a different kind of reckoning. Some had retired, others transferred. A few remained, their careers marked indelibly by a file that had once seemed destined to gather dust. The verdict validated years of persistence, of late nights and fruitless leads, of quiet determination in the face of mounting frustration. Yet it also provoked introspection, a sober assessment of the investigative tools and limitations of the past. In private conversations, they revisited old decisions, scrutinized early assumptions, and grappled with the uncomfortable truth that had technology advanced sooner, justice might have arrived before 2 decades had elapsed. This introspection extended beyond individual reflection, sparking broader institutional change. Law enforcement agencies across the state began conducting comprehensive reviews of their cold case archives, identifying files that could benefit from modern forensic techniques. Budgets were reallocated, specialized units expanded, partnerships forged with private laboratories and genealogical databases. The success of Laura's case became a catalyst, a rallying point for renewed commitment to the forgotten and unresolved. Each reopened file represented a family still waiting, a story still suspended, and the hope that time, when paired with innovation, could yet yield answers. Yet this surge of optimism carried with it an undercurrent of unease. As genetic genealogy gained prominence, ethical debates intensified. Civil liberties advocates raised concerns about consent, data security, and the potential for misuse. Could a system designed to reunite families and trace heritage become a tool of surveillance? Where did the boundary lie between collective safety and individual privacy? The case that had delivered long-awaited justice now stood at the center of a cultural reckoning, its implications rippling far beyond the confines of a single courtroom. Amid these debates, the figure of Daniel Reeves receded into the background, yet his presence remained palpable, a dark anchor tethering every discussion to the reality of violence. In interviews conducted before sentencing, psychologists attempted to unravel the layers of his psyche, searching for patterns that might illuminate the path from obsession to murder. They spoke of attachment disorders, of distorted cognitive frameworks, of emotional isolation exacerbated by transient living. But each analysis circled back to the same impasse. Understanding could explain behavior, but it could not justify it. The ultimate responsibility remained his own. In his final statement before the court, Reeves addressed Laura's family in measured tones, expressing regret without elaboration, sorrow without visible emotion. His words hovered in the air, carefully chosen yet strangely hollow, prompting conflicting responses. For some, they represented a long-overdue acknowledgement of harm. For others, they felt insufficient, a pale echo of the devastation inflicted. Laura's brother later described the moment as anticlimactic, a confrontation stripped of the catharsis he had imagined for years. There was no revelation, no profound insight, only the stark reality that some answers would forever remain out of reach. The sentence, when delivered, carried the expected severity, ensuring that Reeves would spend the remainder of his life within the confines of the penal system. The judge spoke of accountability, of deterrence, of the sanctity of human life, Yet beneath the formal language lay an implicit admission: punishment could not equate to restoration. No measure of incarceration could reverse time, could restore the laughter and promise extinguished on that October night. The law could only impose consequence, not provide recompense. As the case faded from headlines, its echoes persisted in quieter forms. Laura's name resurfaced in discussions of forensic science, her story cited in academic papers and training seminars as a testament to the power of perseverance and technological evolution. Her photograph, once confined to missing person flyers and news articles, now appeared in presentations about genetic genealogy, her legacy entwined with the very tools that had eventually spoken for her. In this way, her life and death contributed to a broader narrative, shaping practices that might one day bring answers to others. Within her community, remembrance took on a renewed urgency. A small memorial garden was established near the beach, where she had once jogged, a tranquil space overlooking the restless Pacific, its pathways lined with native plants and inscribed stones bearing messages of love and resilience. Each year, on the anniversary of her death, friends and family gathered there, lighting candles as dusk settled, their reflections flickering in the ocean breeze. The ritual honored not only her memory, but the enduring bonds forged in the crucible of loss. Yet, even as these acts of commemoration offered solace, they underscored the irrevocable passage of time. Children who had once played on the street where Laura lived were now adults with families of their own. Neighbors who had stood behind police tape had moved away, their memories fading into fragments. The house itself had changed hands multiple times, its walls repainted, its rooms reconfigured, yet an intangible residue of the past lingered, an echo perceptible only to those who knew its story. This interplay of continuity and change gave the case a haunting resonance. It served as a reminder that violent acts do not exist in isolation. They ripple outward, altering trajectories, reshaping communities, embedding themselves in collective memory. The resolution of Laura's murder closed one chapter, but it did not erase the countless ways in which that night had altered the lives it touched. Instead, it offered a lens through which to examine the fragility of safety, the unpredictability of human behavior, and the tenuous boundaries that separate ordinary moments from irreversible tragedy. As months turned into years, the story gradually settled into the archive of solved cases, its urgency dimmed by the relentless forward motion of time. New headlines emerged, new crises demanded attention, yet beneath the churn of news cycles, the lessons of the case endured. Investigators continued to refine their techniques, families of victims found renewed hope, and society grappled with the ethical terrain mapped by technological progress. Laura Bennett's name, once synonymous with mystery, became emblematic of resolution, a symbol of both the promise and the complexity inherent in the pursuit of justice. And still, in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world holds its breath and shadows stretch long across empty streets, the memory of that first scream lingered, a faint echo woven into the fabric of night. It whispered of vulnerability, of lives intersecting in catastrophic ways, of the thin line between presence and absence. It reminded those who listened that every story, no matter how conclusively told, leaves behind traces that refuse to vanish, fragments of sound and memory that drift through time, waiting for someone, somewhere, to hear them. Long after the courthouse emptied and the cameras withdrew, after the headlines dulled and the story receded into the background hum of public memory, the case refused to fully settle. It lingered in the quiet margins of daily life, in the spaces between routine and reflection, where unresolved emotions gathered like dust in forgotten corners. For those closest to Laura Bennett, the end of the trial did not mark a return to normalcy, but the beginning of a new, unfamiliar chapter, one defined by the strange, disorienting absence of waiting. For 22 years, their lives had been anchored by a single, relentless question. Who did this?
Why?
Every morning had carried the weight of that uncertainty. Every night had closed beneath its shadow. Now, with the question answered, the space it left behind felt vast and disquieting. Grief, once structured by hope and anticipation, became amorphous, untethered. There was no longer an investigation to follow, no next update to anticipate, no possibility of sudden revelation. Only the stark finality of truth and the knowledge that nothing more could be done. Laura's parents found themselves revisiting memories with new eyes, sifting through the past in search of signs they had missed. They replayed her stories, her offhand comments, her casual references to acquaintances, wondering whether Daniel Reeves had ever surfaced in conversation, whether his presence had ever brushed close enough to leave a trace. The exercise yielded no clarity, only exhaustion, and yet they returned to it again and again, compelled by a need to reconcile the ordinary image of their daughter's life with the extraordinary violence that ended it. Her brother, grappling with a different form of aftermath, began to channel his energy outward. He spoke at conferences, participated in panels on cold cases and forensic innovation, lent his voice to campaigns advocating for the reopening of dormant investigations. In these spaces, Laura's story transformed from a personal tragedy into a broader call to action, a testament to the necessity of persistence. Each retelling carried a fragment of her with it, extending her presence into rooms she had never entered, touching lives she had never met. Yet this public role came at a cost. Reliving the narrative, recounting the details, responding to questions that hovered perilously close to voyeurism, reopened wounds that had barely begun to heal. The line between honoring her memory and being consumed by it blurred, forcing difficult choices about when to speak and when to step back. In private moments, he wrestled with guilt, uncertain whether moving forward constituted betrayal, whether allowing joy back into his life diminished the significance of what had been lost. For the investigators, closure brought its own complications. The resolution of such a long-standing case was professionally gratifying, but it also underscored the limitations of their earlier efforts, the years during which technology and methodology had lagged behind possibility. Some turned inward, questioning whether they could have pushed harder, looked deeper, resisted the inertia that settles over unsolved files. Others directed their focus forward, determined to apply the hard-earned lessons of the past to prevent similar delays in the future. Within forensic science, Laura's case became a touchstone, cited in discussions of genetic genealogy and its transformative potential. Workshops dissected the investigative process step by step, analyzing the decisions that had led to the breakthrough. Academic journals debated the ethical contours of the technique, weighing its undeniable effectiveness against concerns of consent and data privacy. In classrooms and laboratories, her story shaped the education of a new generation of scientists and detectives, its legacy woven into the fabric of evolving practice. This institutional momentum, however, was tempered by sobering realities. For every cold case solved through advanced DNA analysis, dozens remained resistant, their evidence degraded beyond usability, their trails eroded by time. Families continued to wait, their hope oscillating between fragile optimism and weary resignation. The success of one case illuminated both the promise and the limitations of progress, a reminder that technology, no matter how powerful, could not guarantee universal resolution. As attention shifted to these broader implications, the individual narrative risked dilution. Laura Bennett, once a vibrant presence, threatened to become an abstract symbol, her humanity subsumed by the machinery of discourse. To counter this, her family sought ways to preserve the texture of her life beyond the circumstances of her death. They compiled photographs, letters, and anecdotes into a digital archive, a living testament accessible to friends, researchers, and strangers alike. In these fragments, her laughter, her creativity, her quiet kindness resurfaced, restoring dimension to a story too often flattened by tragedy. Visitors to the memorial garden by the beach left notes tucked among the stones, messages of solidarity, of shared loss, of gratitude for a life that, though cut short, had inspired persistence. Some were written by families still awaiting answers, their words tinged with both hope and fear. Others came from survivors of violent crime, their sentiments shaped by empathy and resilience. Together, These offerings formed a chorus of voices, a collective acknowledgement of vulnerability and endurance. Yet beneath these gestures of remembrance, a persistent unease endured. The knowledge that Daniel Reeves had lived undetected for so long unsettled assumptions about safety and familiarity. Neighbors who had once greeted one another with easy trust now recalled the years of unknowing proximity to a killer, the casual interactions that, in hindsight, seemed charged with latent danger. This retrospective fear, though irrational, proved difficult to dispel, embedding itself in the subconscious of a community already marked by loss. Sociologists studying the case observed subtle shifts in behavior, a lingering hypervigilance that persisted long after the immediate threat had vanished. Home security systems multiplied. Neighborhood watch programs expanded. Conversations about personal safety grew more frequent, their tone edged with caution. These changes, though understandable, highlighted the broader psychological impact of unresolved violence, the way it infiltrates collective identity, reshaping norms and expectations. In this climate, the concept of closure revealed its complexity. While the legal process had concluded, emotional resolution remained elusive, a mosaic of acceptance, grief, anger, and fatigue. Each individual navigated this terrain differently, their paths diverging according to temperament and circumstance. Some found solace in ritual, others in advocacy, still others in deliberate disengagement, choosing to reclaim portions of life untouched by the case. And yet, certain moments resisted categorization. A familiar song drifting from a passing car, the scent of salt and eucalyptus on a coastal breeze, the sudden, inexplicable tightening of the chest in a crowded room. These sensory echoes, unpredictable and insistent, served as reminders that memory does not obey linear timelines, that the past can intrude without warning, collapsing years into a single, visceral instant. In one such moment, Laura's mother stood alone at the water's edge, watching the waves roll in under a fading sky. The ocean's rhythm, steady and indifferent, offered a counterpoint to the turbulence within her. She thought of her daughter's morning runs, of the footprints that had once marked the sand, of the life that had unfolded so briefly along this shoreline. The thought did not bring peace, but it brought clarity. That grief, like the tide, ebbs and flows, its movement constant even when imperceptible. This realization did not diminish the loss, but it reframed it, situating personal sorrow within a broader continuum of human experience. It suggested that endurance, rather than resolution, might be the truest measure of healing, that survival itself constituted a form of defiance against the violence that had sought to erase. As the years continued their relentless advance, Laura's story gradually integrated into the tapestry of local history, taught in classrooms, referenced in community discussions, its lessons absorbed into the collective consciousness. New families moved into her old neighborhood, their children playing on the same sidewalks, unaware of the shadows beneath their feet. Life persisted, as it always does, resilient and indifferent, carrying forward even as it accumulated scars. And in that persistence lay a paradoxical comfort. For while tragedy freezes moments in time, life insists on movement, on renewal, on the possibility of meaning beyond devastation. Laura Bennett's absence remained a wound, but her presence, refracted through memory and impact, continued to shape the world in quiet, enduring ways. Thus, the story settled into a delicate balance between remembrance and renewal, its echoes fading yet never fully disappearing, a reminder that even in the wake of the most profound loss, something persists, an imprint, a resonance, a whisper carried on the wind, urging those who listen to bear witness, to remain vigilant, and to honor the fragile, irreplaceable weight of every human life. Time, relentless and impartial, continued its forward march, yet the case lingered like a low-frequency hum beneath the surface of everyday life, audible only to those attuned to its resonance. For the community, the story of Laura Bennett became a reference point, a quiet measure against which new events were unconsciously compared. Whenever sirens cut through the night or unfamiliar cars slowed along residential streets, Memory stirred, drawing invisible lines between present unease and a past that refused to fully release its hold. In the years following the verdict, subtle shifts reshaped the landscape of law enforcement. Cold case units expanded, their offices humming with renewed purpose. Shelves once sagging under the weight of forgotten files were reorganized, digitized, cross-referenced, each case re-examined through the lens of emerging technology. Investigators trained in genetic genealogy moved between jurisdictions, sharing techniques, refining protocols, building networks that transcended regional boundaries. A quiet revolution unfolded, its effects rippling outward in ways both profound and unpredictable. Families long resigned to silence found themselves drawn back into a cycle of hope. Letters arrived, phone calls followed, invitations to submit DNA samples offered a chance, however fragile, at answers. For some, this reawakening brought solace, a sense that their loved ones had not been entirely abandoned by the system. For others, it reopened wounds they had painstakingly sealed, forcing them to confront the possibility of resolution and the terror of renewed disappointment. In living rooms and kitchens across the state, these conversations unfolded in hushed tones, the stakes too high for casual deliberation. Within this shifting landscape, Laura's case served as both beacon and warning. It demonstrated what persistence could achieve, yet it also highlighted the emotional toll of protracted uncertainty. Counselors specializing in trauma were brought into investigative teams, their role to support families navigating the volatile terrain of hope and grief. The recognition that justice, even when delayed, exacted psychological costs marked a subtle but significant evolution in institutional culture. Meanwhile, the story attracted the attention of scholars and filmmakers, its arc ideally suited to narrative exploration. Proposals circulated, scripts drafted, documentary crews requested access to archives and interviews. Each inquiry prompted careful consideration from Laura's family, who weighed the desire to preserve her memory against the risk of commodifying her suffering. They declined some offers, accepted others, seeking a balance between visibility and respect, between telling the story and protecting its core. One project, a limited investigative series, delved deeply into the forensic journey, tracing the technological advances that had bridged decades. Its creators approached the material with meticulous care, foregrounding the science while maintaining a reverent distance from sensationalism. When it aired, audiences responded with a mixture of awe and unease, captivated by the precision of modern methods and unsettled by their implications. The series reignited public discourse, propelling genetic genealogy into mainstream conversation and prompting renewed scrutiny of its ethical contours. As awareness grew, legislative bodies grappled with the need to establish clearer guidelines. Committees convened, hearings held, experts summoned to testify. Debates oscillated between the imperative of public safety and the sanctity of personal data, each side invoking Laura's case to bolster its arguments. Could the ends justify the means? Did the promise of closure warrant the potential erosion of privacy? The questions resisted easy resolution, their complexity reflecting the intricate interplay between technology, law, and human values. In this charged environment, Daniel Reeves receded further into obscurity, his life now constrained by the rigid rhythms of incarceration. Yet even within prison walls, his presence exerted a subtle influence. Inmates, aware of his notoriety, approached him with a mixture of curiosity and caution, probing for details, testing boundaries. He responded with reserve, rarely speaking of the past, his silence a barrier as impenetrable as the concrete that surrounded him. Psychologists continued their assessments, seeking insights that might inform broader understandings of violent fixation, but their findings remained provisional, fragments of comprehension rather than definitive answers. For Laura's family, the passage of time brought incremental change. Birthdays and anniversaries remained fraught, yet their intensity softened, grief evolving from an acute ache into a persistent, subdued presence. They learned to inhabit this altered emotional landscape, finding ways to carry memory without being crushed by it. Laughter returned in cautious increments, joy flickering at the edges of days once dominated by sorrow. These moments did not erase the past, but they affirmed the possibility of coexistence, of life unfolding alongside loss. In private, Laura's mother maintained a ritual of writing letters to her daughter, filling notebooks with reflections, questions, and unspoken confessions. The practice offered a semblance of dialogue, a way to externalize thoughts too heavy to bear alone. Over time, these entries shifted in tone, moving from anguish and anger toward contemplation and, eventually, a tentative peace. Though she never expected a response, the act of writing forged a bridge between what had been and what remained, anchoring her in a continuum rather than a void. Her father found solace in physical labor, channeling emotion into tangible creation. He volunteered in community construction projects, building playgrounds, repairing homes, erecting structures that would outlast him. Each completed task served as a quiet defiance of entropy, a statement that, even in the aftermath of destruction, something enduring could be fashioned. In these efforts, he honored Laura's memory not through retrospection, but through forward motion, embodying the resilience she had once admired. Their son, balancing advocacy with personal restoration, gradually reoriented his focus. He remained engaged in reform initiatives, yet he also pursued interests long neglected, reclaiming fragments of identity eclipsed by years of activism. Music, travel, and new friendships reintroduced spontaneity into his life, reminding him that existence need not be solely defined by tragedy. This reclamation was neither linear nor uncomplicated, but it marked a critical step toward equilibrium. As the immediate circle adapted, the broader community continued its subtle transformation. Neighborhood events incorporated moments of remembrance, integrating Laura's story into shared rituals. School curricula included discussions of forensic science and ethical reasoning, using the case as a real-world framework for abstract concepts. In these contexts, her narrative transcended personal loss, becoming a catalyst for education and reflection. Yet, despite these integrative efforts, an undercurrent of vulnerability persisted. The knowledge that violence could erupt without warning fostered a cautious vigilance, an awareness of fragility woven into daily routines. Parents taught children safety protocols with renewed emphasis, not from paranoia, but from an acknowledgement of unpredictability. A trust, once assumed, became conditional, earned through familiarity and time. These shifts, though subtle, reflected the enduring imprint of a crime that had unsettled foundational assumptions about security. The natural world, indifferent to human turmoil, continued its cycles. Seasons turned, storms battered the coast, wildflowers bloomed in defiant color along cliffs and highways. In these rhythms, some found comfort, a reminder that existence extended beyond the confines of human narrative. Others perceived in them a stark contrast, a testament to continuity amid irrevocable change. Laura had once sketched these landscapes, capturing their transient beauty in vibrant strokes. Now, those drawings, preserved in family albums, acquired new resonance, their impermanence echoing the fleeting nature of life itself. Years later, a chance discovery added an unexpected layer to the story. While renovating a small rental property, a contractor uncovered a box hidden behind a wall panel, its contents preserved in dust and shadow. Inside lay personal effects, photographs, handwritten notes, fragments of a life in transit. Among them, investigators identified items that had once belonged to Daniel Reeves, relics of his itinerant existence. The find offered no new evidence, no revelation capable of altering the case's outcome, yet it provided a tangible glimpse into the private world he had inhabited. These artifacts, mundane yet intimate, prompted renewed analysis. Psychologists examined the writings, searching for patterns, for glimpses of the cognitive distortions that had fueled his obsession. They found expressions of longing, resentment, and grandiosity interwoven with banal observations, a disquieting juxtaposition that underscored the ordinariness of his surface life. The exercise reinforced a sobering truth, that the capacity for extreme violence often coexists with outward normalcy, concealed beneath layers of routine and social camouflage. The discovery reignited fleeting media interest, but the public's response was muted, tempered by fatigue and the recognition that the central questions had already been answered. The story had entered a new phase, one less about revelation and more about assimilation, its lessons gradually absorbed into collective understanding. As decades accumulated, the case assumed a mythic quality, its contours smoothed by repetition, its complexities distilled into archetype. It became a cautionary tale, a parable of persistence and technological triumph, its darker nuances sometimes eclipsed by narrative simplicity. Those who had lived through its unfolding, however, retained a more intricate memory, attuned to the ambiguities and emotional textures that defied tidy resolution. In quiet moments, when the world seemed suspended between breaths, Laura's story resurfaced in unexpected ways. A documentary clip encountered late at night, a passing mention in a lecture, a fleeting recollection triggered by a familiar street corner. These intrusions, though softened by time, retain their capacity to unsettle, to evoke a complex blend of sorrow and reverence. And yet, woven through these recollections was a persistent thread of meaning. The knowledge that her death had contributed, however inadvertently, to advancements that might spare others lent a measure of purpose to the loss. It did not justify, did not redeem, but it suggested a form of continuity, a way in which even the most senseless acts could yield unintended, life-preserving consequences. This notion, fragile and contested, offered a semblance of solace. It affirmed that while violence fractures, it does not wholly define, that from the fissures can emerge pathways toward understanding and prevention. In this delicate balance between despair and hope, the legacy of Laura Bennett found its enduring shape. Thus, the story persisted, not as a static chronicle of crime and punishment, but as a living narrative, evolving with each retelling, each reinterpretation, each moment of reflection. It inhabited the spaces between memory and imagination, science and ethics, grief and resilience, its echoes resonating long after the final verdict had been rendered. And in those echoes lay the quiet insistence that every life, no matter how abruptly extinguished, leaves behind a trace capable of shaping the world in ways both subtle and profound. As the years unfolded, the case began to exert an influence beyond the boundaries of law, science, and memory, seeping into culture in ways that were subtle yet pervasive. It became a point of reference, a story whispered in classrooms, dissected in university seminars, and cited in policy debates, its contours reshaped with each retelling. Yet beneath these public manifestations, the emotional undercurrent persisted, flowing quietly through the lives of those who had been closest to the original tragedy, shaping their choices, their silences, and their dreams. For Laura's family, the slow return to ordinary rhythms was neither linear nor predictable. There were days when the weight of the past receded enough to allow laughter, and others when a single stray thought could unravel weeks of hard-won stability. In these oscillations, they learned to navigate a terrain defined not by resolution, but by endurance. Grief became less an event than a climate, a persistent atmosphere that colored perception without always demanding attention. In the early mornings, Laura's mother often walked along the shoreline, tracing the boundary between land and sea. The ocean, vast and unyielding, mirrored the magnitude of her loss, yet its ceaseless motion offered a quiet reassurance that even the most immovable pain was subject to gradual transformation. With each step, she recited fragments of memory, her daughter's favorite songs, her laughter, the peculiar way she tilted her head when listening. These recollections, once sources of acute anguish, softened into companions, gentle presences that accompanied her through solitude. Her father, now older, his movements slower, continued his work in community construction, though the physical demands exacted a heavier toll. He approached each project with meticulous care, measuring twice, cutting once, his precision a form of meditation. In shaping wood and stone, he found a language for emotions that resisted articulation, translating grief into tangible contribution. The structures he built stood as quiet testaments to persistence, their solidity contrasting with the fragility of human life. Their son, balancing advocacy and personal fulfillment, ventured into new territories, both literal and figurative. Travel carried him across continents, immersing him in unfamiliar landscapes and cultures, expanding his sense of perspective. In distant cities, anonymity offered a reprieve from the identity forged by tragedy, allowing him to exist, briefly, as simply another traveler, unburdened by history. Yet even in these moments of detachment, Laura's presence accompanied him, an invisible thread binding each new experience to the narrative of home. Within academic and forensic circles, the case continued to inspire innovation. Researchers developed more sophisticated algorithms for genealogical matching, refining accuracy while reducing the risk of false positives. Laboratories invested in methods to extract usable DNA from increasingly degraded samples, pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible. Each technical advancement carried with it the implicit promise of new answers, new closures, new reckonings. Yet it also underscored a sobering reality, that for every story illuminated, countless others remained shrouded, their evidence lost to time, their victims consigned to anonymity. This duality, hope tempered by limitation, permeated professional discourse. Conferences convened around themes of ethical responsibility, emphasizing the need for transparency, consent, and oversight. Case studies, including Laura's, served as both inspiration and caution, illustrating the profound impact of forensic breakthroughs while highlighting the potential for misuse. In these dialogues, her story transcended its origins, shaping the evolving relationship between science and society. Meanwhile, within the broader cultural imagination, the narrative took on symbolic resonance. Writers and artists drew upon its elements, obsession, persistence, delayed justice, to explore themes of memory and accountability. Fictional adaptations, loosely inspired, populated bookstores and streaming platforms, their characters and plots bearing only passing resemblance to reality. While these creative endeavors extended the story's reach, they also risked diluting its specificity, transforming lived experience into abstraction. Laura's family, wary of this erosion, maintained a careful distance, choosing preservation over proliferation. In quiet moments, the community continued its rituals of remembrance. Candlelight vigils marked significant anniversaries, their flames trembling in the coastal wind. Local schools organized service projects in Laura's name, encouraging students to engage in acts of kindness and civic responsibility. These gestures, modest yet sincere, embedded her legacy within the fabric of daily life, ensuring that her memory endured not as a cautionary tale alone, but as a catalyst for compassion. Yet beneath these affirmations, the specter of vulnerability remained. The realization that violence could emanate from unexpected quarters fostered a lingering alertness, an awareness of fragility woven into routine interactions. Trust, though not extinguished, became conditional, its boundaries more carefully drawn. This recalibration of social expectation reflected a broader cultural shift, one mirrored across communities shaped by similar tragedies, a collective negotiation between openness and self-protection. In this atmosphere, discussions of prevention gained prominence. Educational programs emphasized emotional literacy, conflict resolution, and mental health awareness, seeking to address the roots of fixation and alienation before they could metastasize into harm. These initiatives, though imperfect, represented an acknowledgement that justice alone was insufficient, that the true measure of progress lay in reducing the conditions that enabled violence to flourish. Laura's story, recounted in these contexts, became a poignant reminder of what was at stake. As these efforts unfolded, the natural world continued its indifferent cycles. Coastal storms carved new contours into the cliffs, erasing footprints, reshaping familiar paths. Wildfires swept through distant valleys, their smoke drifting across the horizon, a reminder of nature's own capacity for sudden, transformative force. In these phenomena, some perceived metaphors for loss and renewal, the relentless interplay of destruction and regeneration that defined both ecological and human experience. Years later, a small, unanticipated event stirred the narrative once more. A retired detective, sorting through personal archives, discovered a notebook he had kept during the early days of the investigation. Its pages, yellowed and brittle, contained meticulous observations, sketches of floor plans, lists of potential suspects, and, in the margins, fragments of speculation and self-doubt. Reading these entries, he confronted the immediacy of his former self, the urgency and uncertainty that had characterized those initial weeks. Moved by the rawness of these records, he contacted Laura's family, offering to share the contents. Together, they pored over the notes, tracing the investigative journey from its inception, reliving the hopes and disappointments that had defined its trajectory. The exercise proved unexpectedly cathartic, illuminating the earnestness and dedication that had underpinned the search, even when success seemed unattainable. It provided a measure of reconciliation, bridging the gap between intention and outcome. From this exchange emerged a collaborative project, a curated archive combining investigative documents, personal reflections, and forensic analyses, designed to preserve the case's complexity for future generations. Hosted by a local historical society, the collection invited visitors to engage not only with the facts, but with the emotional and ethical dimensions of the story. It stood as a testament to the multifaceted nature of justice, honoring both the rigor of science and the resilience of human spirit. In the months following the archive's opening, visitors arrived from across the state, some bearing their own stories of loss, others drawn by curiosity. Many left notes in a guest book, their words echoing common themes: gratitude, sorrow, determination. Reading these entries, Laura's family recognized a broader community of empathy, a network of individuals bound not by proximity, but by shared recognition of vulnerability. This recognition fostered a sense of connection that transcended the specifics of the case. It affirmed that while tragedy isolates, it also unites, forging bonds across disparate experiences. In this convergence, the narrative of Laura Bennett evolved once more, shifting from singular loss to collective reflection, its resonance amplified through communal engagement. And still, in the quiet spaces between these interactions, the memory of that night lingered, a subdued echo that refused to fade entirely. It surfaced in dreams, in sudden recollections, in the ambient hush before dawn. Yet over time, these intrusions softened, their edges worn by repetition and resilience. What remained was not the sharpness of terror, but the gravity of remembrance, a solemn acknowledgement of impermanence. Thus, the story continued, neither concluded nor static, but unfolding in subtle, cumulative ways. It inhabited the interstices of law and art, science and ethics, personal grief and public discourse. In these layered expressions, the legacy of a single life extended outward, shaping perceptions, inspiring action, and reminding those who listened of the profound interconnectedness that binds individual destinies to collective history. And in that interconnectedness lay a quiet, enduring truth that even in the aftermath of unspeakable loss, meaning could emerge, not as consolation, but as testament, affirming the fragile, luminous value of every life that flickers, however briefly, against the vast canvas of time. As decades drifted onward, the case settled into a strange dual existence, at once distant and immediate, a chapter of history that remained perpetually unfinished in the emotional lives of those it had touched. The world advanced in restless acceleration, technology evolving, cities reshaping themselves, generations replacing one another, yet the echo of that single night persisted, a faint vibration threading through time, resurfacing in moments of vulnerability, reflection, and quiet reckoning. In the broader landscape of criminal investigation, the legacy of Laura Bennett's case continued to expand. Law enforcement agencies adopted genetic genealogy not as a novelty, but as a standard tool, embedding it into protocols for unsolved violent crimes. Cold case task forces multiplied, their offices humming with renewed urgency, their walls lined with photographs of faces frozen in uncertainty. Each new match reignited dormant narratives, and with them, waves of anticipation and fear, hope and grief, playing out in countless households. For families still waiting, Laura's story became a beacon and a warning. It represented the promise that answers might one day emerge, but also the reminder that the passage of time could be merciless. Some clung fiercely to optimism, submitting DNA, revisiting old evidence, granting interviews in the hope of rekindling public interest. Others recoiled from the prospect of reopening old wounds, choosing the fragile stability of not knowing over the volatile possibility of truth. In both responses lay a shared understanding that uncertainty, though painful, had become an integral part of survival. The ethical debates surrounding forensic technology intensified, their urgency sharpened by the increasing frequency of breakthroughs. Legislators wrestled with the challenge of crafting frameworks that could harness scientific power without eroding civil liberties. Advocacy groups pressed for transparency and consent, while victims' families argued for the primacy of justice and closure. Public forums brimmed with impassioned discourse, the lines between safety and surveillance, accountability and autonomy, continually renegotiated. Within this charged atmosphere, Laura's narrative served as a reference point, invoked by both sides as evidence of what was at stake. Her life and death became symbols within a broader conversation about the kind of society people wished to inhabit, one defined by relentless pursuit of truth, or one cautious of the costs such pursuit might entail. The tension between these visions mirrored deeper philosophical divides, reflecting humanity's enduring struggle to balance progress with restraint. Meanwhile, in quieter domains, the case continued to shape individual trajectories. Young students, inspired by its forensic dimension, pursued careers in science and criminology, citing the story as a catalyst for their ambitions. Some sought to understand the mechanics of genetic analysis, others the psychology of criminal behavior, still others the legal intricacies of evidence and rights. In classrooms and laboratories, Laura's legacy took on new forms, its influence diffusing into diverse fields of inquiry. Artists, too, found in the narrative a wellspring of inspiration. Poets composed verses exploring themes of absence and persistence. Painters rendered coastal scenes imbued with melancholy light, their canvases echoing the landscapes Laura had once traversed. Musicians crafted compositions that wove tension and release into haunting melodies, their rhythms mirroring the oscillation between hope and despair. Through these expressions, the story transcended its factual origins, entering the realm of emotional truth, where it resonated with universal experiences of loss and longing. Yet for all these outward manifestations, the core of the narrative remained deeply personal. Laura's family continued to navigate the evolving contours of grief, their relationships reshaped by time and circumstance. Holidays acquired new meanings, anniversaries softened yet never vanished, and milestones carried the bittersweet weight of absence. They learned to celebrate cautiously, to honor memory without surrendering to it, to carry their daughter and sister forward not as a wound, but as a presence woven into daily life. In private conversations, they spoke less of the crime and more of the life that preceded it. Stories of childhood adventures, of academic aspirations, of small, endearing idiosyncrasies surfaced with increasing frequency. In these recollections, Laura reemerged not as a victim, but as a vibrant individual, her complexity restored. This shift, subtle yet profound, marked a transition from trauma toward remembrance, from fixation on loss to affirmation of existence. The memorial garden by the beach matured, its plants growing tall and resilient, their roots anchoring the soil against erosion. Visitors traced the engraved stones, their fingers lingering over names and messages, absorbing the collective testament to endurance. Over time, the space evolved into a sanctuary not only for grief, but for contemplation, its quiet paths inviting introspection. In this setting, the boundary between past and present blurred, allowing memory and immediacy to coexist in gentle equilibrium. Occasionally, strangers approached Laura's family, sharing their own stories of unresolved loss, drawn by the resonance of shared experience. These encounters, though emotionally taxing, fostered unexpected connections, transforming isolation into solidarity. Through listening and empathy, they forged bonds that transcended circumstance, reaffirming the communal dimensions of suffering and healing. In these interactions, a recurring theme emerged: the transformative power of acknowledgement. Many expressed that being seen, being heard, mattered as much as any legal resolution. This insight reframed the family's understanding of closure, shifting its locus from external verdicts to internal recognition. Justice, they realized, was not solely a matter of courts and sentences, but of collective witness, of refusing to let stories fade into obscurity. As the years accumulated, the intensity of public attention waned, yet the case retained its symbolic potency. It became shorthand for perseverance, a touchstone in discussions of cold cases and forensic evolution. In this abstraction, however, lay the risk of oversimplification, the flattening of complexity into digestible narrative. To counter this, those who had lived its reality continued to emphasize nuance, reminding audiences that behind every statistic and breakthrough lay human lives, intricate and irreplaceable. This insistence on complexity extended into educational contexts, where instructors used the case to illustrate not only scientific techniques, but ethical dilemmas, emotional ramifications, and societal impact. Students were encouraged to grapple with ambiguity, to question assumptions, to recognize the interconnectedness of disciplines. In this holistic approach, Laura's story functioned as a bridge between knowledge and empathy, fostering a generation attuned to both precision and compassion. In the realm of policy, incremental reforms reflected these sensibilities. Guidelines governing genetic data usage incorporated safeguards, oversight mechanisms, and avenues for public input. While debates persisted, a tentative consensus emerged around the necessity of balance, an acknowledgement that the pursuit of justice must be tempered by respect for individual rights. Laura's case, often cited in these discussions, continued to influence the evolving architecture of law and ethics. Meanwhile, Daniel Reeves remained confined within the austere routines of incarceration, his presence reduced to institutional record. Occasional appeals surfaced, procedural challenges filed and dismissed, their outcomes predictable, their impact minimal. For most, his existence faded into irrelevance, eclipsed by the broader implications of the case. Yet in the abstract, his story served as a stark reminder of the latent capacities that can reside within ordinary facades, a cautionary emblem of the thin lines separating normalcy from catastrophe. In moments of introspection, psychologists and sociologists revisited his narrative, exploring the confluence of factors that had culminated in violence. Their analyses, though academically rigorous, often circled back to a central enigma: the irreducible mystery of human behavior. Despite advances in understanding, the leap from fixation to fatal action remained resistant to definitive explanation, underscoring the limits of prediction and prevention. This recognition reinforced a collective humility, an acceptance that certainty, whether scientific or moral, is inherently provisional. It encouraged a posture of vigilance and care, an awareness of fragility that tempered confidence. In this ethos, the legacy of Laura Bennett found its most enduring expression, a call to attentiveness, to empathy, to the deliberate cultivation of connection in a world prone to disjunction. As twilight descended each evening, the coastal horizon glowed with transient color, the sun dissolving into the Pacific in a display of fleeting brilliance. For those who paused to watch, the spectacle evoked a quiet reverence, a reminder of beauty's impermanence. In these moments, Laura's memory often surfaced, entwined with the rhythms of nature, her presence diffused into light and shadow, movement and stillness. Thus, the story persisted, not as a static chronicle, but as a living current, shaping perceptions, guiding actions, and inviting reflection. It flowed through institutions and individuals alike, its influence subtle yet pervasive, its lessons continually reinterpreted. And in this ongoing evolution, The narrative transcended its origins, becoming part of a broader meditation on loss, resilience, and the enduring human quest for meaning amid uncertainty. In the end, perhaps the most profound legacy of the case lay not in the verdict, nor in the technological triumph that enabled it, but in the countless quiet transformations it inspired, the conversations it sparked, the careers it shaped, the compassion it cultivated. Through these ripples, Laura Bennett's life, though brief, continued to reverberate, affirming the enduring truth that even in the face of irreparable loss, the human capacity for connection and purpose remains boundless. The years kept moving, slow and merciless, and yet the case refused to fade. It became a ghost that hovered over the town, an invisible presence felt in empty hallways, in dimly lit kitchens, in the uneasy glances between neighbors who had once trusted each other without question. Children who had been born the year of the murder were now old enough to ask about it, their curiosity igniting a new wave of whispered stories and half-forgotten details, and each retelling seemed to reshape the past, blurring the line between memory and imagination, truth and fear, until even those who had lived through it began to doubt what they knew. Detectives rotated off the force, files were boxed and moved, desks reassigned, but the cold case folder remained, thick with reports and photographs, heavy with unresolved grief, waiting in a locked cabinet like a sealed tomb. Then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, something changed. It began not with a dramatic breakthrough, not with a sudden confession or a startling discovery, but with a bureaucratic memo and a small grant approved for re-examining unsolved cases using newly available DNA technology. The budget was modest, the expectations low, but the timing was perfect. Techniques that had once been experimental were now routine. Databases that had once been sparse were now vast, interconnected, pulsing with genetic profiles collected from across the country. For the first time, evidence that had seemed useless decades earlier could be given a second life. Boxes were retrieved from storage. Seals were broken. Evidence bags, yellowed with age, were laid out once more under harsh fluorescent lights. Each item was cataloged again, photographed again, scrutinized again, as though the past itself were being reopened, forced to expose its secrets. Among them were fragments that had been dismissed as too degraded, too contaminated, too insignificant to matter. A smear on a torn sleeve. A single hair trapped in the fibers of a jacket. A faint trace of skin cells on a broken window latch. Each one was now treated with reverence, as though it carried the whisper of a confession. Technicians worked in sterile rooms, their movements precise, almost ritualistic. Tiny samples were extracted, amplified, analyzed. Machines hummed, screens flickered, and data streamed into systems capable of comparing millions of genetic markers in seconds. Days stretched into weeks. Weeks into months. And then one afternoon, a match appeared. It was not a direct hit. No familiar name flashed onto the screen. Instead, it was a partial match, a distant genetic cousin, a thread that led outward into a vast and tangled family tree. But it was enough. It was the first tangible sign that the killer might finally be within reach. The discovery ignited a frenzy of activity. Investigators who had grown accustomed to dead ends suddenly found themselves racing against time. Genealogists were brought in, experts in tracing lineage through census records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, and obituary columns. They built sprawling family trees, mapping connections across generations, following branches that stretched across states and decades. Each new lead spawned a dozen more, and slowly, painstakingly, the web began to narrow. At the center of that narrowing circle was a cluster of names, men who had lived in or near the town at the time of the murder, men who fit the age range, the physical description, the opportunity. Some were dead, their secrets buried with them. Others had vanished, leaving behind little more than faded photographs and fragmented records. But one name refused to disappear. It surfaced again and again, tied to addresses, employment records, minor arrests, fleeting appearances in police logs. A man who had drifted in and out of the community, never staying long enough to be noticed, yet never quite leaving. Detectives began to reconstruct his life. They traced his movements, charted his jobs, interviewed former neighbors and coworkers. Memories surfaced reluctantly, as though dredged from deep water. He had been quiet, they said, kept to himself, polite but distant. Some recalled his temper, sudden and explosive. Others remembered the way he watched people, his gaze lingering just a moment too long. No one had suspected him then. No one had even remembered him until now. Surveillance was initiated. His routines were documented. Every coffee cup he discarded, every cigarette butt he flicked onto the pavement, every napkin he left behind at a diner became a potential source of genetic confirmation. It was a delicate dance, one wrong move capable of alerting him, sending him into hiding, erasing the fragile advantage the investigators had gained. Weeks passed. Tension mounted. And then finally the call came. The DNA matched. It was the kind of moment detectives dream about, the culmination of years of frustration and failure, but there was no celebration, no triumphant cheers. Only silence. A heavy, sobering stillness, as though everyone present understood the gravity of what they were about to unleash. A lifelong mystery was about to collide with a living human being, and the impact would be catastrophic for everyone involved. An arrest warrant was prepared. Teams were assembled. Protocols were reviewed and reviewed again. When the knock finally came at his door, it was just after dawn, the hour when sleep is deepest and resistance weakest. He opened it in confusion, blinking against the sudden brightness, and in that instant, his fate was sealed. He did not struggle. He did not protest. He simply stared, eyes darting from face to face, as though searching for an explanation that could not exist. The news exploded across the town like a shockwave. Decades of speculation collapsed into a single, jarring headline. The cold case, the one that had haunted generations, the one that had shaped the identity of an entire community, had been solved. And yet, the revelation brought no simple relief. Instead, it unleashed a storm of conflicting emotions. Vindication, rage, grief, disbelief. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, recounting where they had been the day the murder occurred, replaying their memories in light of the new information, questioning every assumption they had ever made. Some felt guilt, wondering if they had overlooked signs, if they had unknowingly crossed paths with the killer, smiled at him, spoken to him, trusted him. Others felt anger, directed at the system, at the years of missed opportunities, at the long wait for justice. For the victim's family, the impact was overwhelming. The name they had whispered in their nightmares now had a face, a history, a tangible presence. They were forced to confront the reality that the person responsible had lived freely for decades, building a life while they mourned, aged, and endured an unending cycle of hope and despair. Closure, they discovered, was not a clean ending, but a complicated, painful beginning. The interrogation was brief. Faced with irrefutable evidence, the suspect wavered. He denied at first, his voice steady, his gaze defiant. But as the genetic data was laid before him, as timelines and witness statements converged, cracks began to form. His confidence eroded. His posture sagged. And then, in a barely audible murmur, he admitted what he had done. The confession was clinical, stripped of emotion, a recitation of actions rather than a revelation of guilt. He spoke of anger, of impulse, of a moment that spiraled beyond control. He offered no apology, no expression of remorse. Only facts, delivered with unsettling calm. For the detectives who had chased his shadow for so long, the words were both triumphant and hollow. The truth had been uncovered, but it offered no solace, no redemption, no way to restore what had been lost. As the case moved toward trial, media attention intensified. Every detail was dissected, every development scrutinized. Journalists descended upon the town, their cameras and microphones transforming familiar streets into a stage for national spectacle. Old wounds were reopened. Private grief was thrust into public view. The community, once united by shared tragedy, now found itself divided by differing reactions to the resolution. Some demanded harsher punishment, their anger burning as fiercely as it had decades earlier. Others sought understanding, desperate to comprehend how such a crime could remain hidden for so long, how a man could carry such a secret without breaking. And beneath it all lay a deeper unease, a lingering question that no verdict could answer. How many other stories remained unresolved, waiting in darkness for their own moment of reckoning. Court proceedings unfolded with relentless intensity. Evidence was presented piece by piece, reconstructing the night of the murder with chilling precision. Jurors listened in stunned silence as timelines were rebuilt, as forensic experts explained the science that had bridged past and present, as witnesses recounted memories they had long tried to bury. The defendant sat motionless, his expression unreadable, as though the weight of his actions had yet to fully descend upon him. When the verdict finally came, it was swift and unequivocal. Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom, reverberating in the hearts of those who had waited decades to hear it. Tears flowed. Hands trembled. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though the relentless tension that had gripped the town might finally loosen its hold. But even as the sentence was pronounced, an unsettling realization took root. Justice, though achieved, had come too late to heal the deepest wounds. Years stolen could not be returned. Lives altered could not be restored. The shadow of the crime would linger, etched into the collective memory of the community, a permanent reminder of vulnerability and loss. In the days that followed, the town slowly returned to its routines. Shops reopened. Schools resumed their schedules. Traffic flowed once more along familiar roads. And yet, beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted. Conversations took on a quieter tone. Strangers were regarded with cautious scrutiny. The illusion of safety, once shattered, could never be fully rebuilt. The cold case was officially closed, its file marked with the finality of legal resolution. But its story refused to end. It lived on in the memories of those who had endured its long reach, in the lessons etched into police procedure, in the technological advancements that promised to unlock other mysteries waiting in the wings. It became a testament to persistence, to the relentless pursuit of truth, to the belief that even the darkest secrets could eventually be dragged into the light. And yet, as night settled once more over the quiet streets, an eerie stillness returned, familiar and unsettling. The kind of silence that invites reflection, that resurrects old fears, that whispers of the fragility of certainty. Somewhere in the distance, a lone street lamp flickered, casting elongated shadows across the pavement, and in those shadows lingered the echo of a question that would never fully fade. How many years must pass, how many lives must change, before every cold case finds its voice? The sentence did not end the story. It merely shifted its weight, transferring the burden from unanswered questions to unbearable truths, and in the days that followed, the town began to realize that solving the cold case had not closed a chapter, but cracked open a deeper one. The courthouse emptied, the cameras moved on, the reporters packed up their vans and left behind streets that felt strangely hollow, as if the sudden absence of attention exposed wounds that had been hidden beneath decades of silence. In living rooms across the community, families sat in front of flickering televisions, absorbing the final headlines in stunned quiet, trying to reconcile the image of a frail, aging man in handcuffs with the monster that had haunted their nightmares for so long. For the victims' relatives, the verdict was not an ending but an invasion. Grief, long held at bay by hope and uncertainty, surged back with renewed force. They were forced to relive every moment, every unanswered phone call, every hollow knock at the door, every Christmas morning where an empty chair loomed like an accusation. Now, with the killer identified, those memories sharpened, stripped of ambiguity, each one pointing directly to a man who had walked free for decades. The knowledge was corrosive. It ate away at the fragile equilibrium they had built to survive, replacing it with anger that burned too hot to contain and sorrow too heavy to express. The detectives felt it too. Veterans of countless investigations, hardened by years of exposure to humanity's darkest impulses, they found themselves shaken in unexpected ways. This case had been their white whale, a puzzle that refused to yield, a reminder of professional failure that lingered in the back of their minds. Solving it should have brought triumph. Instead, it delivered exhaustion and a quiet, unsettling reckoning. They replayed the early days of the investigation in their thoughts, scrutinizing every decision, every missed opportunity, every lead that had been dismissed too quickly. Could it have been solved sooner? Could the victim have been granted justice before time robbed her family of so much? Files were reopened not for evidence, but for introspection. Training manuals were rewritten. Protocols were updated. The case became a cautionary tale whispered in police academies, a stark lesson in persistence and humility. New recruits learned its timeline by heart, studying the mistakes alongside the breakthroughs, absorbing the unspoken truth that behind every unsolved file lay a family frozen in suspended grief, waiting for answers that might never come. In the community, conversations turned inward. Longtime residents began to re-examine their memories, reconstructing the past with newfound clarity and unease. Familiar faces took on sinister undertones. Innocent encounters were recast as chilling near misses. Someone remembered sharing a drink with him at a local bar, laughing at a joke he barely understood. Another recalled a brief argument over a parking space, the flash of rage in his eyes dismissed at the time as nothing more than irritation. These recollections, once mundane, now pulsed with dread, each one a reminder of how easily evil could disguise itself as ordinary. Parents spoke more cautiously to their children, warning them about trust, about appearances, about the hidden depths within seemingly harmless strangers. Teachers incorporated discussions of the case into lessons on community safety and critical thinking, their voices measured, but heavy with implication. Clergy addressed it from their pulpits, struggling to balance calls for forgiveness with the raw reality of irreversible harm. The town became a living laboratory for collective trauma, grappling with the paradox of justice achieved too late. Yet beneath the turmoil, there was a subtle shift, a quiet resilience taking root. Vigils were held not only in memory of the victim, but in celebration of the perseverance that had finally unearthed the truth. Candles flickered in the night, their soft glow reflected in tear-streaked faces, illuminating a shared resolve that such darkness would not define the community's future. Stories of kindness surfaced, of neighbors who had supported each other through years of uncertainty, of friendships forged in the crucible of fear and loss. These narratives offered a fragile counterbalance, proof that even in the shadow of horror, compassion could endure. The prison intake process was swift and impersonal. The man who had once moved invisibly through the town now stood stripped of identity, reduced to a number, his fate sealed by concrete walls and iron bars. In the sterile confines of his cell, the weight of his actions began to descend. Nights stretched endlessly, punctuated by distant echoes and the relentless hum of fluorescent lights. Sleep came in fractured intervals, haunted by memories he had long suppressed. Faces emerged in the darkness, accusatory and unyielding. He found no solace in remorse, only a gnawing awareness that the freedom he had taken for granted was gone forever. Psychologists attempted to probe his mind, seeking insight into the mechanisms of his violence, the psychology of a man capable of carrying such a secret for so long. He offered little. His responses were clipped, evasive, a shield of detachment that deflected deeper inquiry. To him, the past was a sealed chamber, best left unopened. To the world beyond his cell, it was a puzzle still begging to be understood. Meanwhile, advancements in forensic science continued to ripple outward, fueled in part by the success of this case. Law enforcement agencies across the country re-examined their cold case inventories, identifying evidence long deemed unusable, now ripe for renewed analysis. Laboratories expanded. Databases grew. A quiet revolution unfolded, one genetic profile at a time, promising answers to families who had waited in anguish for decades. The ripple effect was profound, a testament to the transformative power of technology when paired with relentless determination. Yet each breakthrough carried its own burden. With every solved case came fresh waves of grief, as families confronted truths that, once hidden, now demanded acknowledgement. Closure, it became clear, was not a destination, but a process fraught with setbacks and emotional turbulence. The narrative of justice, so often portrayed as clean and definitive, revealed itself to be complex and deeply human, marked by contradictions and lingering pain. In the town where it had all begun, life pressed forward. New businesses opened along the main street. Children who had once whispered about the killer in hushed tones now spoke openly, their fear tempered by the knowledge that persistence could triumph over darkness. The house where the crime had occurred stood renovated, its walls repainted, its windows replaced, yet an intangible weight lingered, an aura that no amount of restoration could erase. Passers-by slowed as they approached, instinctively lowering their voices, as though the air itself demanded reverence. At night, the streets were quieter than before. The familiar hum of traffic softened, replaced by a contemplative stillness. In that stillness, memory surfaced unbidden, drifting through open windows and across empty sidewalks. The town had been changed irrevocably, its innocence fractured, its resilience tested. But it had endured, carrying forward the lessons etched into its collective consciousness. The story of the cold case spread far beyond its origin, inspiring documentaries, podcasts, and academic studies. Each retelling sought to capture the tension, the mystery, the painstaking journey from obscurity to revelation. Yet none could fully convey the emotional magnitude borne by those who had lived it, the decades of waiting compressed into a single, earth-shattering moment. The case became a symbol, a reminder of both the fragility and the tenacity of justice, a testament to the idea that time, though merciless, could also be a conduit for truth. And still, questions lingered. Not about guilt or innocence, but about the nature of memory, the limits of investigation, the unpredictable paths through which answers emerge. Could earlier intervention have altered the course of events? Were there signs that, had they been recognized, might have spared years of suffering? These uncertainties haunted the narrative, resisting resolution, ensuring that the story remained open-ended, a cautionary tale without a tidy conclusion. For the family, healing unfolded in uneven steps. Some days brought fragile peace, moments of quiet acceptance where the past loosened its grip. Other days reopened old wounds, triggered by a familiar song, a photograph, a scent that carried them back to a time before everything changed. They learned to navigate this emotional terrain together, leaning on shared memories and the unwavering support of those who had walked beside them through decades of uncertainty. In that solidarity, they found a measure of strength, a way to honor their loved one not solely through grief, but through enduring connection. In the broader community, the case became woven into local lore, a story passed down to new generations as both warning and inspiration. It served as a reminder that vigilance mattered, that small observations could hold profound significance, that silence in the face of suspicion could have devastating consequences. Schools incorporated its lessons into curricula. Community groups organized forums on safety and awareness. Slowly, deliberately, the town transformed its trauma into purpose. Yet as time moved forward, the echoes of the past refused to fade entirely. On certain nights, when fog settled low and the moon cast pale light across deserted streets, the atmosphere seemed charged with memory, as though the land itself remembered what had occurred. In those moments, the boundary between then and now blurred, and the story felt unfinished, suspended in a space beyond chronology. Because justice, though delivered, had not erased the fundamental truth that a life had been taken, a future extinguished. No verdict could undo that. No sentence could restore what was lost. The cold case, now solved, remained a scar, a permanent imprint on the soul of the town, a reminder that even when answers arrive, they carry with them an enduring weight. And so the narrative continued, not in headlines or courtrooms, but in the quiet persistence of memory, in the collective determination to ensure that such darkness would never again be allowed to grow unnoticed. The town moved forward, step by cautious step, carrying its history with it, aware that every solved mystery also unveiled new responsibilities, new questions, new imperatives. In that awareness lay both burden and hope, the dual legacy of a cold case that, though finally answered, would never truly be over. Night fell slowly over the town, the kind of unhurried descent that blurred the boundary between dusk and darkness, and in that lingering half-light, the echoes of the past seemed to breathe more freely, seeping from walls, drifting along sidewalks, settling into the corners of rooms where conversations hushed and hearts beat a little faster. Even with the verdict delivered, even with the killer confined behind steel and concrete, the story refused to rest. It moved silently through the lives of those who remained, weaving itself into dreams, shaping instincts, whispering reminders that certainty is fragile and safety is never absolute. In the months that followed, the town learned how to exist with its history rather than against it. Memorials were erected, modest yet dignified, bearing the victim's name in engraved stone that caught the sunlight by day and reflected street lamp glow by night. Flowers appeared and disappeared, replaced by fresh ones, an unspoken ritual of remembrance. People paused as they passed, some offering silent prayers, others simply standing still, as though hoping the stillness itself might speak. In these small gestures, the community attempted to stitch together a sense of continuity, to anchor the present in the acknowledgement of what had been lost. The family returned to routines long abandoned. They cleaned out closets, sorted through boxes of photographs, rediscovered handwritten notes and faded birthday cards, each artifact a portal to a time before fear had taken root. Laughter resurfaced in cautious fragments, followed by tears that arrived without warning. They learned to carry both, allowing joy and sorrow to coexist, recognizing that one did not betray the other. In their quiet resilience, they became symbols of endurance, living proof that survival did not require forgetting. Yet beneath this surface healing, a deeper current flowed, one shaped by questions that would never fully yield. Why this victim? Why this moment? Why this town? The randomness of violence offered no logic, no comforting narrative of cause and effect. It simply was an eruption of darkness that left devastation in its wake. Psychologists spoke of patterns, criminologists analyzed risk factors, sociologists examined environmental influences, but none could distill the chaos into a formula that made sense to those who had suffered. The mystery of motive lingered, an unresolved chord vibrating beneath the story's apparent resolution. For law enforcement, the case became a benchmark, a point of reference against which future investigations were measured. Cold case units expanded, bolstered by renewed public interest and funding. Laboratories operated around the clock, processing evidence once deemed obsolete, transforming fragments into potential revelations. Each new identification, each long-delayed arrest, traced its lineage back to this breakthrough, a testament to the ripple effect of perseverance. Yet with every success came a sobering realization. For each case solved, countless others remained suspended in uncertainty, their answers locked in evidence, still waiting for the right moment, the right technology, the right convergence of chance and determination. The town's younger generation absorbed the story as a cautionary legend, one that shaped their understanding of community and responsibility. They grew up with an acute awareness of vigilance, of the importance of speaking up, of the danger of dismissing discomfort. Yet they also inherited a narrative of hope, of patience rewarded, of truth eventually surfacing despite decades of obscurity. This dual legacy forged a complex identity, one that balanced fear with resolve, skepticism with faith in collective action. As seasons cycled and years accumulated, the intensity of public attention faded, replaced by a quieter, more introspective engagement with the past. The story slipped from national headlines into local memory, where it remained vivid, though less raw. It surfaced in classroom discussions, in late-night conversations, in the reflective pauses that followed sudden sirens or unexplained noises. It lingered in the spaces between words, an unspoken presence that shaped perception long after the immediate shock had subsided. The house where the crime had occurred eventually found new occupants, a young family drawn by its location, its renovated charm, its promise of fresh beginnings. They moved in cautiously, aware of its history, respectful of its shadows. Over time, they filled it with laughter, with music, with the everyday chaos of life unfolding. Children's drawings adorned the refrigerator. Toys cluttered the living room floor. The house, once a symbol of terror, slowly reclaimed its identity as a home. Yet on certain nights, when the wind rattled the windows and silence stretched unbroken, an intangible heaviness settled, a reminder of the lives that had intersected within those walls, of the moment that had altered everything. The man behind bars aged visibly. His hair thinned, his posture stooped, his eyes dulled by routine and regret. The passage of time, once his ally, now became his adversary, marking each day with a slow erosion of physical strength and mental clarity. In the solitude of his cell, memories resurfaced with relentless persistence, replaying scenes he had spent decades suppressing. Whether these recollections brought remorse or merely irritation, no one could say. The walls bore silent witness, indifferent to the turmoil they contained. Occasionally, he wrote letters, their contents guarded, their recipients few. Some speculated they were attempts at confession, others at justification, still others at self-preservation. None were ever made public. The details of his inner world remained opaque, an enigma that paralleled the mystery he had embodied for so long. In this final irony, even in captivity, he retained a measure of secrecy, a fragment of the power he had wielded unknowingly over an entire community. Beyond the town, the case reshaped public discourse around justice and time. It fueled debates about the statute of limitations, about the ethics of genetic databases, about privacy and consent in the age of forensic genealogy. Advocates argued that the promise of closure justified the means. Critics warned of slippery slopes, of surveillance disguised as security. The story became a touchstone, invoked in policy discussions and academic journals, its implications reverberating far beyond the lives it had directly touched. Through it all, the central truth endured. A single act of violence had set in motion a chain of events that spanned generations, altering trajectories in ways no one could have foreseen. The cold case, once a static file gathering dust, had transformed into a living narrative, its influence radiating outward in concentric circles. Each person it touched carried a fragment of its weight, a reminder of vulnerability, of resilience, of the enduring quest for meaning in the aftermath of loss. And still, the nights remained. In those quiet hours, when the town slept and the world receded, memories stirred. The faint echo of footsteps on an empty street, the distant hum of a passing car, the soft creak of a settling house. These sounds, ordinary in any other context, took on heightened significance, as though the air itself remembered the moment when innocence fractured. In such moments, the story felt unfinished, not because its facts were unresolved, but because its emotional resonance defied closure. The cold case had been solved, yet its shadow persisted, a testament to the enduring power of unanswered questions, even when answers finally arrive. It served as a reminder that justice, though essential, is not synonymous with healing, that truth, though necessary, does not erase pain. What it offered instead was recognition, validation, the acknowledgement that suffering had not been forgotten, that perseverance had not been in vain. As dawn broke once more, casting pale light across rooftops and sidewalks, the town awakened to another day, carrying its history forward. People stepped outside, breathed in the crisp morning air, and continued with their lives, each movement infused with an awareness shaped by the past. In that continuity lay the ultimate resolution, not in the confines of a courtroom or the certainty of a verdict, but in the collective determination to endure, to remember, and to move forward without surrendering to fear. Because in the end, the story of this cold case was not solely about a crime, or an investigation, or even justice. It was about the fragile resilience of human beings, about the ways communities absorb trauma and transform it into purpose, about the unyielding pursuit of truth in a world that so often resists it. It was a testament to the idea that even the darkest chapters can illuminate paths toward understanding, if not peace. And so the narrative settled into the fabric of the town, no longer a scream, but a low, steady pulse, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been preserved. A story whispered in shadows and sunlight alike, enduring beyond headlines and verdicts, echoing through time as both warning and promise, a final, lingering testament to a cold case that would never truly fade.